Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Skeptic Skeleton Sunday streams. And this week, we're going to go through the case for Christ, but not the one you're thinking of. Before we get to that, though, apparently science has conceded the existence of God, which I find very fascinating. So we'll get started with that, and then we'll watch the case for Christ, just not the one that you're probably thinking of. Before that, I just got to post something in chat. Never mind. Let's just get started with science conceding the existence of God, shall we?
I want you to imagine for a second that you're a financial auditor. You have two cases that you're working on, which means that you're
I find it interesting that you tell me to imagine that I'm a financial auditor, but you don't explain what a financial auditor is. It makes it very difficult to imagine something if I don't know what the thing is. I only have speculation and guess to go off at this point, but okay.
responsible for meticulously scanning through bookkeeping and accounting for these two different companies. So you look at the first company and you find they're doing a good job. They're running a tight ship. They're doing their payrolls on time. They're keeping accurate accounting of their income and their expenses, and they employ qualified professional accountants whose practices and methodologies are easy for you to follow. With the second company, you find that nothing makes sense at all. None of the payroll has been done. The income and expenses aren't accounted for at all, and all of their documentation is in complete disarray and chaos. So you decide to look into this a little bit further. And you discover that the CEO of this company, he's gone kind of crazy. And he put his 2-year-old grandson in charge of bookkeeping and accounting, who obviously spent that time not doing bookkeeping and accounting, but throwing paper all over the place and decorating the office wall with the general ledger stamp. Now let me ask you, upon discovering this, would you proceed with your audit of the second company? Would you look at it and say, well, I know he's only 2 years old, but I still have to try and make sense of his method and to discover if there's anything that's been done right here? Or would you look at it and say, there's nothing reasonable to be discovered here, and then close the case on
it? Are you trying to describe theism and atheism? Because I think you've done so in a way that you didn't intend to. That was scarily accurate, but I get the suspicion that you're not going to see the accuracy that I see. The accuracy that I see is that I would wager within the context of the example that the grandson doesn't have a grandfather, that entire concept of the grandfather putting them in charge is made up by the grandson so that they can do whatever they want. And yeah, to answer your question in a more explicit way, I would close the books on it because that doesn't sound like my problem. If I have one company that's doing well, why stress myself out trying to make sense of nonsense of the other company? Again, I don't know what a financial auditor is, so I don't know what motivation they would have to look further into something that does not make sense in and of itself.
The only reason to proceed with an audit or an inquiry like this is to discern what management practices were employed by those who have rational methods for bookkeeping and accounting, and then to try to discern whether or not they stayed within the boundaries of good practices and ethics, or if they strayed far away from them.
Why is that the only reason? I can see a lot of other reasons, probably bad reasons, but other reasons like you're just curious, or it's so bad it's good you can't look away, car crash type of scenario. But I don't see any reason why that is the only reason for you to pursue that. You might have a bias and genuinely believe that despite all the things you're seeing, there is a rationality, there is a methodology, there is a way it has to be correct, and you have to find out. There are lots of different reasons that I can think of, and I don't see it as fair to just say that there's only one reason a person would do that.
That process assumes, before you ever get started, that you are going to be examining the work of intelligent minds.
No, it doesn't. Under the context that we're given, we're under the presumption that the company is being run by a 2-year-old baby. Now, I'm very curious what definition you have that qualifies a 2-year-old baby as intelligent. And if you know you're looking into a company run by a 2-year-old baby, then I don't understand how you would enter the conversation with the presumption that you're working with intelligent minds. And even if you did, maybe that's a faulty assumption. Maybe that's not something you should do. And maybe we should explore the possibility that we shouldn't enter the conversation with any assumptions, let alone the assumption that intelligent minds are going to be involved.
With the purpose of discerning.
Speaking of which, what qualifies as an intelligent mind? Because a lot of people would say that people have intelligence to varying degrees under various definitions. So it would be extremely helpful if you defined what you mean by intelligent mind so that I can follow along. Because right now I kind of have to just assume what you mean, which is something I would rather not do.
If those intelligent minds use the resource of their minds in the service of acceptable accounting practices or deceptive ones, what you wouldn't do is proceed.
What if they use accounting practices that are not acceptable but are not deliberately deceptive either? What if they use accounting practices that just don't work, not that they are being deceptive or misleading?
Proceed with an inquiry like this if you knew there was no intelligibility to be discerned from it. You knew for sure that a 2-year-old had taken over the accounting responsibilities of a company, your audit would end right there because there would be no point in proceeding.
Okay, so you answered your own question and we're in agreement. What's this have to do with the overall topic?
So what can we gain from this clumsy analogy?
Well, I'm glad you admit it's a clumsy analogy.
Well, it should help us appreciate that rational inquiry should only ever be applied to something that is assumed to be intelligible.
How assume the intelligibility of things that you don't know? So, for example, let's say that the grandfather in the scenario does exist, and the grandfather is actually the one giving the orders to the 2-year-old, but we don't know anything about the grandfather at all. We barely know the grandfather's name. We don't know what they've been up to. We don't even know if they're actually even still alive, yet we're going to assume intelligence and investigate. Why would we? If we have no information, we can't judge whether or not the grandfather is or isn't intelligent. And I don't think that you have to assume intelligence in order to look into something. People look into all different subjects of all different types without assuming the intelligence or rationale behind it. You, for example, can look into different religions and assume that those religions don't necessarily have the intelligence behind them, especially if the religion is very simple. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself.
When we use our reason to try to understand something, we are assuming from the outset that the thing we are investigating can be understood.
No, we're not. We are trying to understand it. You don't seem to understand the difference between assuming and testing something. So if someone tells you that the most effective way to get from point A to point B is to ride a bike, if you ride a bike, you are not that riding the bike is the most effective way. You are riding the bike as a means of testing the claim, as a means of testing its effectiveness. The same applies here. In my attempt to understand you, I have no presumptions about whether or not you're rational, whether or not the things you say can or can't be understood, because the conversation hasn't begun yet. I have no good reason to make any assumptions, and it's better that I don't, so that I can actually listen and do better to understand with a more open framework than a closed one. So when I engage with my conversations with you, that is not me assuming that you have some sort of rationale. That's not even necessarily me assuming that you can be understood. That is me testing you, testing whether or not you can be understood, testing whether or not you can make sense, and testing whether or not the things you say are reasonable. It's not an assumption, it is a test.
By reason, because it is reasonable, and because it will reveal itself to us in a rational way.
Wait, let's go back and get the whole sentence.
Should only ever be applied to something that is assumed to be intelligible. When we use our reason to try to understand something, we are assuming from the outset that the thing we are investigating can be understood by reason because it is reasonable.
No, because how would we ever discover something as unreasonable? You're essentially saying that the way human process works is people never discover unreasonable things or never come to understand that things are unreasonable on their own. They always enter the assumption that it's reasonable because it's reasonable. Or at least that's what I got from what you're saying. You're not speaking very clearly, honestly. It's a bit confusing.
And because it will reveal itself to us in a rational way.
What do you mean by reveal itself to us? I can only assume by that you mean like we will discover it, but I don't think that subjects reveal themselves as much as we learn and discover things. And I think those are two key important differences because of where they place the agency. One places the agency on the thing to reveal itself, and the other places the agency on us to discover it. And when I look at the way in which human beings interact with things and come to learn and understand things, more often than not, it is usually a discovery rather than a revelation. Or at least that's how my understanding of science works.
That behind the mystery of the thing, we will discover that there is order and governance to it.
I understand what order means, but what do you mean by governance? Because presumably there are some things that don't have governance, or else everything would just have governance and governance would have no meaning. So how do you tell the difference between something that has governance and something that doesn't? This might seem like a minute distinction, but it's these kinds of minute distinctions that build up over time that build into a massive miscommunication because you have so many small terms that you haven't defined that you might as well be speaking a different language.
If you knew that the thing that you were trying to investigate was composed entirely of meaninglessness and chaos, you would never bother investing the resources that it takes to try to understand it.
Why not? How did I come to the conclusion that it was entirely based on meaninglessness and chaos? How did I come to know that? Presumably, I came to know that through some sort of form of investigation, or I just assumed it, and that seems unreasonable and like something we shouldn't do. Otherwise, besides assuming the thing, I assume we investigate. Besides assuming, I assume. Besides, if we're not assuming that something is governed or made of chaos and disorganization and madness, if we know that, if we came to the point where we know that, we came to that conclusion one of two ways. We either investigate the subject and then came to the conclusion, or we came to the conclusion and then tried to investigate it. At which point, if we already know, why are we bothering to investigate? If we already know that it is chaotic, then you have a point. But my question then is, how do we know? How did we get to the point where we know? What did we do if not investigate the thing already? If we didn't investigate this, how do we know it's chaotic and full of madness and disorganized and all that stuff? How do we know that there's no rationale behind something without just assuming that there's no rationale behind it? And if we're just assuming, how are we any more reasonable than the thing that we think is unreasonable?
Like if one day you looked at it and it was blue and of a certain weight and size and composed of certain properties and behaving in a certain way, and then the next day you look at it, it's hot pink and composed of a completely random, different assortment of properties, you look at that and say, this thing is just chaos. There's no point in trying to apply my reason to it.
No, I wouldn't. I have no idea why it went from one change to another, so I would further investigate it. That's such a small time frame that I don't think that that's enough experimentation or enough investigation to justify essentially giving up. That doesn't seem like good evidence that the thing is chaotic and there's no point in trying to apply my reasoning to it. And even then, there's a chance that my reasoning is incorrect, that my reasoning might be flawed, that my reasoning might fall foul in some way. And I don't see how I'll ever discover the faultiness of my reasoning if I just give up on things that don't seem to apply to my reasoning. The only way my reasoning can improve and get better is if I test it against things that have different reasonings or better reasonings or whatever have you. So when confronted with that scenario, it seems like there's no good reason to just up and stop investigating because it seems random at first. A lot of things might seem random at first before you actually put in the time and energy to investigate them and understand how they work. But that doesn't mean that you should give up because it seems like it's random or it seems that way. Just because something seems a certain way does not mean that it is. And in that scenario, you do not know that it is chaotic. You do not know that it is pointless to apply your reasoning to it. You just assume that because there was a change that happened that you didn't understand based on the scenario you gave.
So what does this have to do with science? Well, science is a method of rational inquiry into the natural universe or the natural world, and it is
That's technically correct, but I wouldn't say it's strictly natural things. It's just things. If there were other things that were not natural that could be studied by science, science would still try to study them. It wouldn't just say, that's hand wavy nonsense and not even attempt to. So I think the natural thing is a bit of a misnomer, but I also might be using misnomer. I'm not sure if I would agree with that particular definition. I would say more that it is an attempt to rationally inquire and understand things, not just natural things.
Assumes, again, from the outset, that the natural world, or the natural universe, is governed by order and intelligibility.
No, it doesn't. How would you know whether or not it was determined by order and intelligibility or chaos and madness? Well, you would have to test it. You would have to investigate it. You would have to look. Just because you look for something does not mean that you are assuming that the thing is there to be found, because it might in fact not be. And you might in fact be open to that possibility, but you won't know unless you actually look. So I don't understand this weird conflation where you think it assumes some sort of intelligibility. This sounds akin to people who make a similar argument, which goes along the lines of, well, you're trying to have a rational conversation with me, which means that you believe that rational conversations can be had. And if you believe rational conversations can be had, you're just assuming someone gave us the capability to have rational conversations. And that shift from the intelligibility of something to someone must have put it there is what I'm very suspicious is going to happen here. It's what I'm very concerned is going to happen here, especially when there doesn't seem to be a good reason to say that just because you investigate something or look into something, you necessarily make any assumptions about the thing. You can investigate something without even assuming that it's investigatable. You're just trying to investigate it as a test whether or not it's investigatable. And there's that word again. There's a difference between assuming and testing does not necessarily entail assumptions. You can test something without even knowing that it's testable or assuming that it's testable. That's the point of the test, to discover whether or not it's testable, among other things, of course.
So science used to audit it, and to understand that order, it assumes that human reason is compatible with and can be applied to the natural universe.
No, it doesn't. It's like, no, it doesn't. Science corrects itself all the time, which would be unnecessary if it really thought it was compatible with the order of nature. The flexibility of science and its willingness to correct itself is evidence against the notion of these assumptions you're making, because this wouldn't make sense if we keep getting stuff wrong. If we assume that everything is orderly in a way that we can understand and we keep misunderstanding things, is that not in direct conflict with that assumption? Yet we continue to investigate things in spite of that, not because we think that there has to be some sort of order to it and we're going to find it, but because we don't know. And the only way to know is to test.
In the same way that we assume and recognize that our reason can be applied to accounting records or to something like a machine.
Here's the other thing. Your reasoning might be able to be applied to accounting records, but mine isn't. I'm terrible at math in general, let alone accounting. So I couldn't get a decent grasp on accounting or math or economics if you tried. That doesn't mean that the point of bringing that up is the demonstration that doesn't apply to everybody, that everybody's reasoning is different. And you can't say that we all make the same assumptions when we all have different degrees and abilities with reasoning. So to say that we make the same assumptions, even though our reasoning and cognitive functions may be vastly different, is unsubstantiated to me.
A machine is governed and ordered according according to certain ideas and principles. It is designed by an intelligence and therefore is intelligible.
Intelligible to who? Because they might not be intelligible to a child. They might not necessarily be intelligible to an artist. They might not be intelligible to some of the greatest minds who have existed 500 years ago. It's not really fair, and I'm talking about modern machines, by the way. It's not really fair to say that everyone has the same reasoning capacity and then therefore everyone makes the same reasoning assumptions. You do that because you understand what a machine is and you understand that it's necessary for a machine to be intelligible. But someone who's never seen a machine before will not come to the same conclusion. This is getting eerily close to the watchmaker argument. I really hope it doesn't become the watchmaker argument.
If the universe is not designed by an intelligence, then it follows that it would not be intelligible.
I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that, because I think natural things are things which are intelligible, but not necessarily created by an intelligence. Trees, for example, and plants are a good example of things that in and of themselves are not intelligent, yet are very much intelligible to us. So I see no reason why intelligence and intelligible are necessarily linked in the way you've described. But even if I was, how do we know whether or not the universe is intelligible or not? We have to test it, which is what we're doing. And the act of testing something does not assume the conclusion, or at least it shouldn't if it's proclaimed to be reasonable.
Our classical and medieval European ancestors, they understood this well.
Did they? What about the ones that were wrong? How did the ones that had wrong assumptions about the universe, how did they understand correctly that the universe must be intelligible and then from there got to the wrong conclusions? I'm trying to understand how you differentiate between the people who do what you say and have these assumptions but end up at the wrong conclusions versus those who end up at the right ones, because I don't see any reason why everyone shouldn't come to the same conclusions if everyone makes the same assumptions.
They first assume that the universe is designed by an intelligence,
which is an unsubstantiated assumption, and they probably shouldn't do that because that will influence their investigation. That assumption is the conclusion that they're trying to test and find out. And when your assumption is your conclusion, when your starting point is the conclusion you're trying to reach, have you actually accomplished anything? Have you done any reasoning whatsoever? If the destination you're trying to go is where you currently are, what reasoning can be done? What reasoning of any sort could you say has been done? Or do you think that assuming your conclusion is rational and is what we should be doing? Because then I can just assume the opposite. If they can just assume the universe is intelligible, why can't I just assume that it isn't? And why does that make me any more or less reasonable than them?
And therefore the work of trying to discover its ordering would not be a waste of their time.
Again, because they're assuming they don't know that. It could very much well be a waste of their time, and the universe could have very much turned out to be chaotic. They had no good reason to think it wasn't because they just assumed something. In your own words, they didn't investigate, they didn't infer, they just assumed. And based on assumptions, knowledge cannot really be had, in my opinion, although that depends on your definition of knowledge.
European theists were obsessed with unraveling the rational mysteries of the natural universe,
And do you not think that that obsession maybe heavily influenced their ability to investigate and cause them to make assumptions and leaps in logic that they shouldn't have? And maybe that's unreasonable, and maybe we shouldn't be using them as a positive example, unless you're trying to make a negative point about theism.
which is why they invested a huge amount of resources into academic training and research, which yielded what we now recognize as the scientific method.
Come again?
Most other societies, when they looked at the natural world, they detected chaos, which is why they weren't preoccupied with that same kind of inquiry.
I might need a citation on that. I don't know if I believe that. The fact that other societies, as you put it, have other religions that have their own cosmology, creation myths, things like that. I'm not willing to grant that. I'm very much not willing to grant that only the European religions were the ones that started with the assumption of the intelligibility of the universe, and everyone else just thought it was chaos. I'm not. It's just not a something I'm willing to grant. You're gonna have to actually back that up or substantiate that or further explain that, or are we just gonna move past it?
One day they would look outside and it would be rainy and cold. The next day, randomly, it would be warm. They would look up in the night sky sometimes and they would see the moon in a particular shape and the stars. And then the next day they look up and they would see nothing. One day the plants and animals would behave a certain way. And then the next day or season, they'd do something different. This appeared to them like the temperamental traits of a personality who was suffering from chaotic mood swings.
This appeared to who? Every other religious society except the Europeans. I find this a little bit insulting to everyone else that wasn't religious and or European, that they just came to this conclusion, that they just did this extremely poor reasoning, that apparently because they saw things were different between the days, they just assumed it was chaotic, especially when you don't clarify which religions you're talking about or which societies you're talking about, just all of the not religious European ones. I find that to be very, very insulting to them and all the research that they've done into things, as well as their other various religions that do proclaim order of some sort. Or have you just never heard or read about any other religion that wasn't a European religion that had some sense of order in it, in its cosmology?
So from that, they assumed and concluded that the natural world was something like a person, and this became known as pantheism, which was embraced by almost all primitive cultures.
What about the ones that weren't? Pantheism has varying degrees, but mostly and more commonly is known to just be multiple or multiplicity or multiple gods, which still assumes an order, by the way. It still assumes a rationale. It just assumes a different rationale than the one you have. They look at the universe and assume that it came about due to a myriad of factors, whereas you look at the universe and assume it came from one singular source. And at the end of the day, you haven't made a case for why one is more or less reasonable than the other. And I'm also not convinced that that's the philosophy of pantheism just because you said so.
Monotheists like Jews, Christians, and Muslims believe that the world was created by a supreme rational mind who imbued it with rationality, such that it can be relied upon to behave in an ordered and governed way, even if it didn't give the appearance of being so at first glance. It just meant that you had to deepen your inquiry to discover that ordered nature behind it all.
I'm confused. So God made it such that, or the supreme intelligence made it such that there was inherent order and intelligibility in things, and also made it so that they would not automatically look like they were inherently intelligible and understandable. Do you not see how that can be a little bit confusing? You're saying that God made it certain that everything was intelligible, orderly, all that good stuff, and also made it not obviously so to everybody, and made things change in ways that seem erratic and unintuitive. That seems counterintuitive to the goal. If the goal is to not only have the universe deliberately function in a dependable, reliable, consistent, orderly way, but also have humans understand that, why would you have it do that but not look like it's doing that? That seems counterproductive to the point of getting everyone to understand the thing you want them to understand, when you make the thing you want them to understand look like it might not be understandable.
We've since inherited and we take for granted those assumptions and those actions and all the great achievements of the founders of modern science.
Just because the founders of modern science were religious does not mean that science is religious. They could have had those assumptions, but the conclusions they arrived at are not then a justification of those assumptions. If you assume for no good reason that a chair is in a room and then you walk in the room and the chair is there, that does not verify the ability to assume your conclusions. That does not mean that assuming is a good verification process. Religion works in the same way. Just because they happen to be religious while they were doing the science does not mean that the science then verified the religion. Even if the religion was the basis of their science and they arrived at correct conclusions, that does not mean that the religion therefore was verified by the correct conclusion, in the same way that a correct conclusion does not verify or justify an assumption.
Who were to a person monotheists, people like Thales, Aristotle, Albertus Magnus, Nicholas Copernicus, Roger Bacon, Isaac Newton, and Rene Descartes. And now we take it for...
I find it interesting that you could list off the name of monotheists who think that way, but you couldn't list off pantheists who are also scientists who thought through pantheism and reached correct conclusions. Or are there no pantheistic scientists, historically speaking, that ever arrived at correct conclusions? Because then I would fail to see the difference between how one is better than the other if they both have their own different assumptions that turn out to verify science, or they end up at correct conclusions despite having different assumptions. I don't know how that would then justify both assumptions.
For granted that science is valid, while forgetting and neglecting all of those first principles and assumptions that had to be established.
Did they have to be established, or was it the case that they were established? Are you saying that science is impossible unless someone is religious? Are you saying that science is impossible unless someone at some point assumed the universe was orderly? Are you saying it's impossible for science to have arose without this monotheistic mindset? Because that's something you have to demonstrate. You can say that, and that's all grand and lovely, but you got to explain that. Why is that the case? There doesn't seem to be any reason why that's the case. You have atheists who do science all the time. You mean to tell me that if we went back in time, atheists just couldn't do science? They would have to be religious first and have to think the universe had an order to it and was intelligible and then do science? Because again, you can say that this is a necessary assumption. You can say that that's something that everyone had to do to get to where we are now. But saying that is not the same as demonstrating it. You have to prove it. You can give me a history lesson on the way things went, but if you want to say that the way things went is the way that they had to go in order to get to where we are, that is something you have to prove. It's not enough to just say you did something to get to this conclusion. You have to prove that that's actually what led you to that conclusion, and that's the only way you could have gotten to that conclusion. You cannot merely assert the necessity of a thing. That's what I'm saying. That's what that whole spiel meant.
And because we've forgotten them, we trick ourselves into thinking that we can carry on doing science while neglecting the fact that we have to concede that there is an intelligence behind the ordering of the natural universe.
We trick ourselves, do we? So scientists who do science and arrive at correct conclusions are doing what? Because they're doing science without this presumption, and they're arriving at correct conclusions, and your entire monotheistic orderly thing does not seem to be something that they have to be willing to concede. Again, you keep saying it's an integral part, but you're not explaining why it's an integral part. You say this machine needs this piece because it's there. And it's like, okay, but what about cars that run without that particular machine? And you're like, well, they're just tricking themselves into running. Or would you go as far as to say that there are no atheist scientists that arrive at correct conclusions? They're all wrong because they're all doing science wrong, because they can't arrive at correct conclusions. They can't even do science without making that assumption. Or is the truth written on in their hearts and they know God exists and all that? Because those are the only ways I can see this going.
When we encounter some phenomenon, it's common to ask, why is that the way it is? For example, why is it that
Hello, deconverted man. I just noticed and added you. I didn't see anything in chat, but hello?
Yeah, hey. I'm I'm here, sort of. Not super well, but I'm here. So
Well, that's okay. If you want to chime in on anything, just let me know and go ahead and I'll give you the space. If you'd rather just be along for the ride, I'm glad to have you.
yeah. I mean, you sent me the thing. Oh, here I am. This guy again.
Yeah,
Science
so
concedes gods exist. No, it doesn't. Where? What? I must have missed that. I mean, I would think that Nova and like Discovery Channel and like Nature and Time Magazine. I think that there'd be some news about this. I think that this would be a pretty big deal.
yes, but that's not what he means.
Of course
So
not.
um I'll catch you up to speed as best I can. Basically, he's saying that if in order for science to function properly, it has to concede that whatever it's trying to investigate is intelligible and orderly. And intelligible things come
No,
from intelligible
jeez. Like
minds.
reality requires a realtor.
Yes, but for intelligence requires an intelligencer.
I don't think you need to go in with that assumption. You don't know. You have no idea going in.
But he does not,
You
and
know.
I pointed this out earlier, he doesn't make a distinction between an assumption and a test. So he's like, well, why would you bother investigating something unless you knew that it was orderly and you knew that you could understand it? If you knew you couldn't understand it was random and arbitrary, you wouldn't
But
bother
you wouldn't. You don't
testing,
know. You don't know until you go in and do the dang test.
which was my point. My point was if you have come to the conclusion that you know this thing is chaotic, how did you do that? You either just
Right. It's
assumed
just
that it
like, oh
was.
yeah, I can't understand that. Did you
Yeah.
look at it?
Yeah,
I
you
did.
either just assumed that it was, or you did some sort of investigation, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So
This
I
guy
don't understand.
on the subject of science, if you don't mind, a little minor tangent.
Go ahead.
That this guy posted on one of my videos. It's like, until science comes up with a cure to tinnitus, the ringing in ears. Probably said it wrong. I don't know. Then I'm gonna keep. I'm not gonna. I'll be an atheist or at a atomicness or something like materialist, but for atom. Atomist, whatever,
Okay.
and I'll be that as soon as they come up with a cure for tendinitis. And I'm like, what? Like, so this is the you can't explain X, so therefore I'm gonna stick with my like Bill O'Reilly. You can't explain the wave, so I'm gonna keep believing what I do until you come up with all the answers. It's an appeal to ignorance, personal incredulity. It's like, well, how can, yeah, sure, science can give us all these other things, but the thing that I want it to answer it can't. So therefore, I'm going to go with my preferred answer. And I think that that's the same sort of thing here, where you're saying, well, science does this, or science does that, or science can't do this, and that all means that there has to be some other explanation that is not itself explained, but that's okay because it explains everything, or something like that. And it's just you
Yeah,
know
I get something similar when it comes to talking about logic or reasoning when they're like, well, they try to use the epistemology of logic and reasoning. How do you know that logic and reasoning lead to truth? And my answer is always the same.
you
It's
don't
you have to test
you have
it.
to test it, right. Yeah, I
So
mean
just because I use it does not mean that I assume it's correct. I'm using it to find out if it's correct or not. And if I
right.
never use it, how do I know if it leads to truth or not if
And
I never try it?
if it was the case that we went to investigate something and we couldn't make any sense of it, then that wouldn't end. I would hope that wouldn't end the investigation.
Yes, because it could be the case that the thing we're trying to investigate is not investigatable or that our methods of
Yeah,
investigation are not sufficient.
right. And I worry about that. I think this is brought up by other skeptics other than us, but it's like, well, when you have an answer, you have your God answer or whatever, then what's the point in looking? You already have your answer. So it's like, well, let's say that we figured out, the Big Bang cosmology to, or whatever cosmology turns out to be the actual one, if it's not the Big Bang. I think there's pretty good evidence for that, but there's some competing ideas anyways. But we came up with the answer, and it was like probably some mathematical formula or something. They'd just say, well, yeah, but that requires the universe is intelligible, so therefore that means an intelligence. It's like, what? Like, what? And of course this all kind of puts to the side of why do you do all these mental gymnastics to suggest that this deity that created everything left hints, but it didn't just come out and say, hey, how's it going, guys? It's just like, I'm going to leave little hints here and there.
Well, that's actually funny. He made a similar point where he was trying to, apparently this is one of the distinction he makes between European theologies and religions and every other one is just he's referring to the monotheistic ones. He's like, well, we came to the conclusion, we looked at the universe and saw that it was orderly and there had to be an underlying order, but it had a seemingly chaotic nature, which is why pantheists exist, because they saw chaos in the universe. And I'm like, well, if we accept that entire framework, you're saying that God, as a monotheist, which he is, you're saying that God put the inherent order and structure there for the monotheist to find, but then made it look chaotic and made it look like madness and disorder for what it is. That seems directly contradictory to the point that it's trying to make. Why would God make everything orderly, but also then not make it look orderly?
Yeah, I mean, some things are orderly and other things aren't. Depends what you mean about order and all this. And so, no, it's, and of course, to use the words because of the natural language, the words sound similar, so it's this nice little rhyme. It's like, oh, intelligence that requires an intelligence. It's a code that requires a coder. It's, that's why I say reality requires a realtor. It's just as silly. It's not an argument. You're just using words that sound similar to try to make some case. And I don't know if he went into it, but I'm suspecting that he's already or will compare things that we see today and say, oh, look how well designed this is. And it's like, well, sure, it looks that way now, but if you go back to when it first was the thing, you wouldn't say that about the beginning or the early state of the. I'm always trying to find a better way to say the beginning of the universe, but it's not really a beginning, that whole thing.
Just say the origin. The
origins of the universe, yeah. That you wouldn't look at that mess and say, well, there's some order there. It's all hot and everything is just in this turbulent state and just it's a mess. I mean, what rhyme or reason could you hope to find there? Maybe some, but certainly you wouldn't find any.
Yeah, I was going to say, I tried to make the point with the tree where it's like, I'm not convinced that just because something is intelligible means that it necessarily is intelligent or was made by being intelligent. Natural things like trees behave in a very intelligent way we can understand, but they don't seem to have an intelligence planting each seed and growing each branch. They seem to grow based on a variety of natural factors. Is the intelligence in that? And I'm assuming he would say that that's because of the original blueprint or whatever, but that's a separate thing that has to be demonstrated.
Yeah, it's even then.
No, I was going to say even then he does this sort of weird thing where going down sort of the complexity argument that you demonstrated. He goes to, well, scientists were originally Christians, and if they weren't Christians looking to find to explain God's universe, science never would have happened. And so we've got to this point where we tricked ourselves that we do the same science that they did without the religion. And I just asked the point right before you got in. I was like, why can't we? You're saying this is necessary to a car because it's there, but what about the other cars that operate without that part? You can't just say it's necessary because Christians were the first scientists, that therefore science could have existed without Christianity or theology or whatever.
Yeah, which is only at best, quasi true, because there's plenty of other people that were, trying to figure out the world that weren't Christian or whatever. But it's that, well, we did it first. We were Christians were the ones that made America lie, and we did this. And I just listened to this dude say, Christians figured out how to get rid of slavery and all this stuff. And it's like, no, they didn't. What the hell are you talking about? No, they didn't. It was a lot. Some Christians might have been involved in that.
Why
but
would they allow it in the first place?
Yeah, it wasn't really there's other Christians that fought for it. So, you can't say that your worldview is responsible for all these things when there are other people that were around the same time working on the same outcomes as you that had completely different worldviews,
Exactly, and that's what I was pushing him on. Is like, are you saying that no one who didn't have that mindset has done science correctly? And if you admit that they have, then you have to concede the point that it's not necessary to do science. Otherwise, I think everyone is a closet monotheist, and we're just tricking ourselves, in his own words.
Yeah, and really, if you thought about it, you're just like, well, what if it was just atheists that invented science? Then what would the argument be? It was like, well, but they did so because they thought the universe was going to be chaotic because you got a straw man thing, right?
Well,
and
that's
then
what
they
he said
found
about
out.
So
yeah. Then you found out the universe was orderly, so then you had to make up evolution, and I don't know if he's that bad, but anyways, I'd like to see him play one of those guitars one day. That'd be cool.
Yeah, it might be, but
put on the helmet, play a guitar.
Oddly enough, he would have to put on the there's a tin cap. Yeah, I assume that helmet is made of tin, so he can wear his tin silver hat thing.
Tinfoil knight's helmet.
Yes.
Anyways, what else is this guy say? All right.
Bursts into a light. Is that the way it is? For example, why is it that the northern sky bursts into a light show sometimes? Or why is it that the universe is filled with matter rather than antimatter? And the more we follow through with that instinct, the more we will start to arrive at the more fundamental questions, which is, why is there a universe at all?
Now, I have an answer to that, and my answer is that there was always going to be something. Even if it was nothing, then there would just be nothing. So this is not an important question to me because it's kind of just like there was going to be some state of affairs. Even if there was no state of affairs, that would be the state of affairs of having no state of affairs. It's one of those guaranteed questions. Why does...
the guy posting on my thing is well, why do you have tendonitis if spirituality is true? What explanatory force does positing an afterlife or a god or whatever help in curing your ear ringing? It doesn't. So we're both stuck. We don't have the answer to this, but one of us might get there. If we figure out the science, we could figure it out maybe one day. But we're not going to get there by just continuing to pretend that we know the mind of God, so to speak. And, well, maybe if I pray standing on my head this time, that will maybe just stand on your head. If that, who knows if the praying part helps or not. But, it's just why not? I don't know. What does it matter? Why do you think there is a why? Maybe there isn't. Maybe there is a how rather than a why. And
precisely. And I always think how is more important than a why, because at the end of the day, there might not be a why.
Yeah,
it might just happen for no reason in particular, but that doesn't mean there's not a methodology. It just means there's no pre-goal that the universe was going for. It just was and did stuff for
it didn't know that
reason.
We were going to be a thing that came about. It's just that's what happened, And if it hadn't, then we wouldn't be here to ask the question, and that's kind of amazing and interesting. And sure, there's a lot we don't know, and that's then that's where people put the "here there be dragons" or "here there be God" sign, where we don't know that, so it's got to be that. No, I don't know that either. I mean, it might be the answer, but then what's your methodology for concluding that answer? Here's all these bad arguments. No, that's not going to work for me. Oh, you can use science. Okay, can we use science on the phenomenon itself? No, because it's beyond science. Okay, well, then you're just talking magic. You're not talking anything at this point. If you're saying, the thing that explains everything is beyond the reach of empirical investigation, repeatable testing, beyond the realm of human understanding. I've heard that one too. It's like, wait a minute, how do you know that? Like,
He's trying to say the opposite almost. He's trying to say it's the basis for that you can't do any of those things without that.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of presuppositionalism. It's like, well, we assume
Exactly.
that, but then you would ask, well, why is God orderly rather than disorderly? You'd have the same questions. He's just moving
push
back
the
a bit.
entire process that you have with the universe and investigating it, you would just push it back a step, because now we would ask the same questions about God. And if you admit that what you're doing is an assumption, then you either have to justify making that assumption or admit that that assumption is unreasonable. But you can't just say the early scientists were Christians who made assumptions and then just say because that happened, it had to happen that way, and there was no other way we could have gotten by.
Like I said, and even if true, it still doesn't prove your point true. It's like, oh, all the X did Z, and Z happened to be true, therefore all the X is true. No, that doesn't flow. That's not a logical underpinning. It's like
that also doesn't account for all the times that science has been wrong, because then if you want to make that point to justify the existence of monotheism by saying that, well, you need it to have science, you're saying we need it to have wrong science too. All the false conclusions we've come to have also been because of monotheism.
And wouldn't you expect
the positive without the negative?
Yeah, and I would expect. Wouldn't you expect that the wrong monotheism would lead to the wrong conclusions then? And then if you're gonna go, because you said you mentioned polytheists and that's chaos. It's like, well, or pantheism or whatever. They've got, well, you've got chaos theory, so they're right there. They've got the butterfly, flapping in a butterfly effect. So there you go. They've got all the quantum stuff. Goodness knows what's going on there. So I guess they're right too, just in selective fields of science. So now what? So everybody's right.
Exactly. So yeah, I did want to do all that for catching up, but let's keep going.
And we don't look at questions like that as if they're a nonsensical arrangement of words. They immediately resonate with anybody who has an inquisitive mind as valid in their inception.
Okay, but what about the ones that don't have inquisitive minds? I don't mean to pause every 2 seconds, but this is another thing I pointed out to him, is different people have different mental capacities and different levels of intelligence. So what's intelligible to you might not be intelligible to everyone else. So it's not fair to say we're all making this secret assumption that the universe is orderly and intelligible when we all have different varying degrees to which we can understand and conceive of intelligence. So he used, at the very beginning, he used a very clumsy accounting example. I don't know anything about accounting. I don't know anything about, well, obviously I know something about math, but I have a strong difficulty understanding math. Math is not my strong suit. I have difficulty understanding math, accounting, economics, all of those things. So it's not fair to say that I'm making the same assumptions as you are when this thing might be easier for you to understand than it is for me. How are we both assuming that it's understandable, but it's easier for you to understand and I have extreme difficulty understanding it if I can understand it at all? How are we both making the same assumptions yet having two different difficulties with understanding the same thing we both think is understandable? But that was just my
I don't understand. So keep going.
Yeah.
It's not like if somebody said something like, when did purple stop smelling like thunder? You would immediately dismiss a question like that as a meaningless arrangement of words. But
no, I wouldn't. I would actually ask what that means because I'm trying to understand. So you might dismiss that for no good reason, but you don't know what the other person means by that. You don't know if this is like, for example, a child. Children say things just to annoy you, even if they know the thing they're saying doesn't make sense. Or this could be someone learning for the first time. There are a lot of different circumstances where a person is genuinely trying to convey an intelligible and understanding idea, and just because you dismiss it offhand doesn't mean that there wasn't any intelligence there. This is the whole assumption thing he keeps talking about. If I investigate it, I have to assume that it is going to be understandable. And if I don't investigate it, then I have to assume that it's just nonsense and it's uninvestigatable. When I don't think you have to do either of those things, you can just have no assumptions and investigate. But that's just me.
I would say that I guess it stops doing that when your synesthesia went away, or however you want to say. I can't pronounce words. You know the synesthesia. Oh yeah, you know. Edit
Yeah,
that.
I know.
You
I don't know
can't.
what the term is, but I know what you're talking about. People,
Yeah, put it in chat. I can't pronounce
yeah,
anything.
but people who can maybe taste
Syn-
colors or hear colors, different things like
Synesthesia,
that.
whatever. But yeah, they can actually, so they could actually say, yeah, thunder tastes purple, and it would make complete sense to them. So the assertion that these words wouldn't make sense is wrong. Whoops.
Yes,
But
it's an assumption, and like he
yeah,
admits it's an assumption, but that's the problem. You can't justify something on an assumption because you're just as likely to be as you are to be wrong. Or if you can justify something on an assumption, then I can just everything he said by assuming the opposite, and we're both equally right. That it's really that simple to me. But let's keep going.
synesthesia. There it goes.
Why is the sky blue? Even if we don't know the answer, we assume that it's a reasonable question to which there is a reasonable answer.
No, we don't. If we don't know what a sky is. So if I didn't know what the sky was, you would have to explain that to me first, and then we would have to do all that. We couldn't make an assumption about whether or not good question to ask, air quotes around good meaning reasonable in this case, and bad meaning unreasonable. We couldn't assume if it was a good or bad question if we didn't know what it was. We could only do that if we knew what they meant and we understood what they were trying to say. So your ability to make these assumptions still hinges on some other bit of investigative information that you may not even realize you have. It's not as easy as to say, well, we only investigate the question of why the sky is blue because we assume that it can be understood. We might not ever understand it, especially if we don't know what the sky is or what blue is, because this question means something entirely different to a blind person, and it's going to be much harder to explain it to them than it is to me. But that's the problem I have with assumptions. So I'm going to stop beating a dead horse at this point. If you have anything to add, you can feel free.
No, I'm trying to say synesthesia still, so
Okay.
I think I did it right finally.
Yeah, I was going to say, however you find it, I would greatly appreciate it if you put it in because I like to look up weird stuff.
Yeah.
And chat might want to, once the 5
Yeah.
people who watch my streams do after it's uploaded.
We'll get more one day.
Yeah, one day. Let's keep going for now.
And why do we do that? Because there is a reason, and you can't inject reason into any information without conceding that someone gave it a reason.
What does that mean? I might, excuse me, apologize, but I might have to go back and re-listen to that because I don't even understand what he meant.
And why do we do that? Because we assume there is a reason, and you can't reason into any explanation without conceding that someone gave it a reason.
Yes,
What?
but if you are injecting reasoning into it, you are the one putting it there. You just admitted that you did it. Trying to say, at least what I think he's trying to say is, you cannot assume that there is reasoning to be found unless you admit that someone put the reasoning there. Not only do I see no valid reason why that's possible, because I can reasonably understand trees and who put the reasoning in the tree in my backyard, but even if I put that aside, you are admitting that you assuming that there is reasoning to be found is you putting the reasoning there. That is an admission that you are making these assumptions and that this all comes down on you. Not that presumably, because I think this is where he's going, not that God out there is putting reason into things, that you are assuming reasoning is there and then saying, well, who put the reasoning there? You assumed it was there, so that's why you think it's there, not because someone put it there. But that's my interpretation of what I think he's trying to say. Any comments, or you want me to keep going?
No, keep going.
Okay.
Reason can only be attributed to an intellect or a will. It cannot be traced back to random, chaotic, or erratic processes.
Why not? You can say that, and I'm not willing to grant that evolution or any other natural process is random or chaotic. Just because you don't understand it or it's not driven by a being doesn't mean that it is those other things. But why not? He does this a lot too, where he just says things, but he doesn't explain them, explain the basis, explain the research or anything. He just says, nope, you're wrong and you can't be right. And it's like, well, why can't I be right? Because you can't. He doesn't explain things for anyone who doesn't already agree with him, because I see no valid reason why he's right. So I'm going to keep going. If you ever want to chime in, just let me know, okay?
Yeah, keep going.
Whether we admit this fact or turn a blind eye to it like too many people in the scientific fields do today.
Too many people in the scientific fields turned a blind eye to this thing you said was a fact. I don't like to harp on scientific acumen. I don't know this guy. I don't know if he has any scientific qualifications. But I find it odd that you just proclaiming that a significant portion of the scientific community is just ignoring a fact that you did not even bother to prove. You just said it was a fact.
Christians started science, and then they all turned away from it, but they're still Christians, but they're ignoring this part. But wait, are they? And then, wait, what? Huh? Wait, what?
He's saying that they are the basis of it, and now
Right, yeah. They started it, and then all the Christians that are still scientists must also be ignoring this, except for the ones that aren't. But what are you talking about?
Non-Christian.
This,
basically saying the ones that don't continue to make the same assumption.
Right. But then it's intelligible or what? And then it's just nonsense. Come on, it's like all the scientists that disagree with me, they're wrong. The ones that agree with me, they're the ones that are right.
Which is fine, but then you have to explain why. You can't just say that and leave it there like a dead fish.
No, that's all he's got. But it's a red herring too.
Yeah, red herring fish.
Red fish. Yeah.
Reason applied to natural phenomenon instinctively presupposes an intelligence behind those phenomena. So
no, it doesn't. Again, I can look at natural phenomenon like my tree, apply reasoning to understand it, and that doesn't assume that anyone biogenetically engineered the tree to be reasonable. I could just understand it. The two things that he's making a connection between don't have a connection in them. My ability to understand something and the ability for the thing to have been deliberately to be understandable. Also, this doesn't take into account all the times it just straight up doesn't work. There are a lot of things like machines or the internet or things that are made by humans, intelligent humans, to be understandable to people that I still don't understand, like math or accounting or things like that. So this doesn't make sense either way. There are lots of things that aren't made to be reasonable that we can reason with, and things that are made to be reasonable that some of us can't reason with. I don't see any indication that if you reason with something, then reason had to have been like implanted there. It had to be genetically engineered there. I don't see the connection.
So if we're going to continue asking and validating those kinds of questions and doing scientific inquiry, we should stop pretending that reason and intelligibility found throughout the natural universe aren't preceded by an intelligent mind.
Why would they have to be preceded by an intelligent mind? You haven't made the case for why they have to be. You just said that they are. You've made no case for why these things can't have reason and order without someone putting it there. You just said they can't just be there. Someone had to have put it there, which is not an explanation. It is the conclusion that you're supposed to be proving. Saying you're right doesn't make you right.
And if we refuse to do so, it shouldn't surprise us that the more hostile we are towards the idea of an intelligence behind the laws of the natural universe, that the more scientific truth will be marginalized by ideological assumptions, superstitions, and assertions. And we're already seeing an alarming amount of that in our contemporary political discourse.
What does contemporary political discourse have to do with science? I really feel like he just tried to make this about politics when that's not what this is about. And I don't understand the idea that the less we assume, the more biased assumptions and conclusions we come to, which sounds like is what he's saying. But I'm roughly done at this point, unless he has any other points to make.
Hey, thanks for watching that.
Nope. Okay, he's done. I'm going to switch to the next thing. You can share your thoughts if you have any.
Well, I was looking up the question at hand, the intelligible universe, and I noted that the search results don't pull up peer-reviewed scientific papers. They pull up blogs and articles and things written by Christians mostly, and I've got a Quora answer, and I've got this one that's from another Christian perspective. This other guy wrote something. It's like, yeah, okay, so that's it. You had the Wikipedia article on intelligibility, although can't trust Wikipedia, that's for sure. But at any rate, it seems like this is this is a case where philosophers are trying to answer this question, and I think okay, but you have to have a methodology, and yet science provides a methodology. So does logic. I don't know if there's anything else that does, but I haven't seen anyone really say, okay, here's another idea. Let's try this to, whatever. It's just let me think about stuff, and how come things are orderly? Because if they weren't, then they'd be disorderly. That's just it's just like if things were different, things would be different. So it's just
precisely. If you didn't, what would happen if the deconverted man didn't come on the stream?
Then I wouldn't be here, right?
He came on the stream, and it's like, if he didn't come on the stream, then he wouldn't be on the stream.
In another universe, I didn't. Whatever.
So now we're going to get into the case for Christ.
Oh God! It's gonna be the Gospels. That's it.
I don't think it's the one you're thinking of. So I've seen a little bit of this, but I won't spoil it. So
I'm gonna say it's gonna be everyone agrees on these three facts: that he died and was buried, and the people saw him after he was dead. And no, nobody agrees that those are even facts. First of all, and secondly, yeah, and whatever. Yeah, okay, and it's in the Bible. It's got to be true because the Bible says all this stuff. Yeah. I don't think you'll have anything new. So
I have a whole rant. I might. No, I'd get in trouble if I did that. On the platform. But I was gonna say I might do because or at least a review of the movie The Case for Christ, because it does.
It's just a farce. I mean, oh look, I'm a journalist. I'm investigating. No, you're not. You're not using any actual investigative journalism. You're going to ask people.
He asked people questions.
No. He asked people questions he knew were going to give him the answers he wanted. Then he edited the questions the answers to the questions he didn't like.
Well, the way the movie phrased it was he asked people questions, they gave him answers, and he believed them, and now he's a Christian.
Right. Yeah.
Which is apparently how journalism works.
That's not. Yeah, he's not a. I mean, come on. Was that Strobel, wasn't it?
Huh?
Strobel?
Yes, Lee Strobel.
Yeah, fuck Strobel. This guy again. Come on, beard guy.
C.S. Lewis once famously proposed a trilemma argument for the divinity of Jesus. He said that Jesus was either a lunatic,
God,
or he actually really was God. What makes this argument so compelling is that there are a considerable number of, maybe even a majority of people, who, when they encounter the teachings and life and exposition of Jesus, they're willing to say that he's a great moral teacher, but he's not the Son of God. It's exactly what you can't say about someone who claims to be of divine.
Now, I want you to pause there.
The
thing that he does, where he just says things, so it's like, okay, now I do not necessarily, I'm not convinced of the historical existence of Jesus, but if I was, and I just said, well, he was a great moral teacher, well, you can't say that because he said he was God. And it's like, okay, why can't I say that? Like I just did. Like, what is the prohibition here? What is the conflict or the contradiction? It just sounds like something you don't like, but you're not explaining anything. He just says things. So then
Okay,
I'm left to
so
do all this speculation in my head because he's not explaining anything clearly. But you go
so
ahead.
the Ann Lee, the founder and leader of the Shakers, claimed that they were the female incarnation of Christ on Earth. I'm not pronouncing this Russian name anytime soon.
Wait,
Uh,
what?
Ann Lee, the founder and leader of the Shakers.
Oh, okay. Please
These,
put that in chat because I might do a video on that. Please.
I mean, here's a whole list. I mean, this was simple. It was like, oh yeah, here's a list of people that all claim to be God or Jesus or whatever. So I guess you can't question any of these people either. And then forget about this. There's people alive today that claim this, and
I
they
would
have
not be
followers.
surprised. Even if that was the case, that doesn't stop me from. Even if no one did, that doesn't stop me from claiming to be that, and that doesn't.
Yeah, and then
mean
you can't question it because anyone that claims to be God, you can't question them. Wait, what? Is that really what he said?
he tried to say something like, "You can't say they're just a moral teacher. You can't say they're anything different than what they said they were."
That's
Because
nonsense. Because you would.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, let's let him explain a little bit more.
Yeah.
Authority that everyone, including him, knew only God had.
Sorry,
Spoke and acted.
went too far.
Jesus claimed to have come down from heaven, and he spoke and acted with an authority that everyone, including him, knew only God had.
Everyone, even the people that didn't believe in his particular God, even the Romans. You mean to make the case that the Romans knew that Jesus spoke with godlike authority? According to what source? How do you demonstrate that? How do you substantiate that? All of this is assuming that Jesus existed in the first place, which I am not willing to believe. But if I was, how? How did everyone understand this? How do you demonstrate that everyone understood this without just saying the Bible says so?
When his disciples and his followers confessed that you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God, he affirmed them in that confession.
Yeah, kind of. Not really, though.
But even if
the problem is, when you actually look at the Gospels, and you look for the point where Jesus just comes out and says he's God, he doesn't. The closest you get is one of the Gospels. He's like, "I am," or "You guys say I am," or something like that, or whatever. And it's so vague.
If you can remember the verses, try to put them not just in the private chat, but in the public chat too, because I do want to make this information available to everyone, whoever watches this video, so they can do their own research. So, if you can remember the verses, please try to put them in the public chat. I'm not good with verses, so, or I might do the research on it and put the verses back in later if I remember.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Go on.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to say, so I'm just going to continue with the video.
Now, a person like that, if he isn't actually of divine origin, cannot be described as a good moral teacher.
Why not?
A good moral teacher does not lay claim to the most audacious origin story imaginable.
Okay, but you're misunderstanding the point. Someone can be a good moral teacher and have negative aspects. So if someone has the position that, you shouldn't hurt children, that is a good moral teaching. And in that specific regard, you can call them a good moral teacher. And they can also have maybe a drug problem or something. That doesn't mean that they can't be a good moral teacher because they make mistakes. The implication here is that Jesus is directly lying here, that you can't say he's a good moral teacher if he lied about being the Son of God, which, again, he might not have known that he was lying. He might have genuinely believed it, or he might have just not known and been vague on purpose. His position on that one specific question does not invalidate any other moral teachings he's had. And I don't necessarily agree that Jesus is a great moral teacher, but even if he was, his great moral teachings and this specific instance don't negate each other. People can be hypocrites, but hypocrites can still have good moral teachings, is what I'm saying.
He would either have to be a lunatic, a liar, or truly what he claims to be.
Or he just didn't exist at all.
Yeah. I hate the false trichotomy: Lord Lunatic or liar, isn't it? Or legend. How about that?
I would go as far as to say the fifth one is just he didn't exist, because the
Well,
legend
that's
could be an
legend.
extension of him existing, as well as he just didn't exist to begin with.
Well, this
There are
goes
lots of
back
legends
to,
of individuals
if
that
you watch my video on Legend of Zelda, you'd understand what legend means. You
Yeah.
don't care. All you care about is Kingdom Hearts, which is awesome, and I want to play Skyrim. But anyways, that's nothing to do with this video. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
It's like, what? People are like, what the?
person that Jesus was and the things that he said and did, the first version seemed pretty unlikely, which is why so many people quickly, without even thinking of how incoherent this is, jump to this conclusion that, well, he's still a great moral teacher and guide for us.
Again, you say incoherent because of one singular question he was asked, but if he wasn't asked if he was God or not, would it then be fair to say if he was a great moral teacher? Are you negating his moral teachings because he was asked a question and might have been a liar on question? That seems a bit like a stretch. Like, if you're going to judge whether or not someone's a moral teacher, you should judge them based on the moral teachings, not one question they were asked, in my opinion.
Then there are people who like to propose a fourth alternative. They say that maybe it was legend. Maybe his followers crafted a very highly sophisticated conspiracy to
No. The other thing people do when they misinterpret legend, where they think it was a deliberate conspiracy theory that they conceived on purpose, as opposed to just them being wrong or them being delusional. And this is fairly easy enough to disprove. I can ask him, what do you think of other religions that aren't Christian? Do you think Buddhists are, you think that their religion is based on a legend? Do you think that Taoism is based on, do you think that Islam is on a legend? Like, do you think that everyone else besides Christians are making up their own elaborate conspiracy theories? Or do you think people are just wrong? And I don't know why people do that, where they don't want to just say they were just wrong. Maybe they just have information and believe things they shouldn't have. Lots of people all the time are wrong and believe things they shouldn't have for a wide variety of reasons. Why is it that strange that these followers of Jesus might have done the same thing? I don't get it.
convince the masses that all the things that are claimed about Jesus in the New Testament actually happened. What I find interesting about that claim is that there are plenty of case studies from history that we can use to get a glimpse of what that actually would have looked like.
Case studies from history? Excuse me?
So these would be cases in which devotees of powerful, influential, or charismatic leaders tried to manufacture a persona, a story, or an origin story.
Again, you say manufacture as if it's deliberate, as opposed to just wrong or just a misunderstanding or just a misperception. There are a lot of people that are really great fans of someone to the point where they're basically worshiping them. But that doesn't mean that they manufactured that. That doesn't mean that they went out and decided, I'm going to worship this person or I'm going to be a huge fan of them. So I really don't understand the intentionality that he's placing here. Like I said, as I'm going to keep going, but if at any point you want to chime in, just chime in.
That would compel the general populace to commit the same kind of devotion that they had for this leader. And in those cases, we often find a couple of things that are characteristic of these kinds of attempts. The first is,
what if we found something that was uncharacteristic? Do we just dismiss it? Or, because it sounds like you're basing the likelihood of the truth of the legend of Christianity based on the truth of some other legends, and I don't think that's fair. But I'll let him finish.
that these people are generally very powerful and influential and have a lot of followers and a lot of resources that they can dedicate to the deception. The second is that no matter how sophisticated this conspiracy is, they never do quite hold together perfectly, especially through the passage of time.
And the story of Jesus has perfectly held together always throughout the passage of time.
falsehoods are a very fragile thing compared to the truth. Take world leaders like the emperors of Rome or other leaders of great states who tried to position themselves in the cosmos next to the gods. But then they eventually died, revealing their mortality, and then they were replaced by people who claimed the same things about themselves.
Is this not what happened with Jesus, or do you think Jesus is still alive? I don't care if you believe in the resurrection nonsense. He ain't here, which is the point. He claimed to be God just like they did, and now he's no longer alive just like they're not, and a lot of people are come afterwards to claim to be God just like with the Romans. So what's the difference here?
I just don't see that. Is he saying like, well, the people behaved good, so therefore he's telling the truth?
No. He's trying to say basically that, with other people who claim to be God, they say that and then they die and then someone else comes up new. So they must have been wrong.
It's the same, but it's the same thing. The only thing you go, well, then Jesus, of course, he came back to life. Well, but you don't know that. It's like people claim that that's what happened, and that's all you really need. You don't need the thing. And why would that matter? Like,
why would it?
He died and came, like, people were doing that all over the place in the Bible, anyways. But I'm just saying, like, why? Does that mean Lazarus?
Jesus raised Lazarus?
Yeah. Lazarus is also God. Then I guess
because he came back from the dead. So
yeah. Well, he had help, but whatever.
Yeah, but let's go.
Until they all died as well, and eventually their great empires suffered the fate that all temporal things do. Or how about a religious?
Didn't Jesus, is his empire still alive? I mean, his religion is, but the society he came from, is it?
I like that Muhammad doesn't have a photo. They're too scared of the photo, like that they'll get killed for the photo of Muhammad.
I know.
That's not what Jesus would look like either, but whatever.
I know, but I don't believe he existed. So I
have to say, if he did, he would have looked Jewish. He wouldn't look Anglo-Saxon, and so whatever.
His time in Mecca as a peaceful religious preacher, he didn't have much success, and so when he migrated to Medina, he quickly gathered a.
He's talking about Muhammad now, just so you know.
Yeah, but it's like the level of success doesn't mean you're right or wrong either.
I know.
Truth. Oh well, whatever. Who cares?
And militant following, which allowed him to set his sights back on Mecca with military conquest, and that included also the neighboring regions. And this led to him gaining an extensive amount of power and wealth as a warlord.
And there were never any Christian warlords ever who ever used their power to impose Christianity on people. That's not a thing that ever happened. Ever.
Nobody
it's
ever.
The Muhammad thing.
Nobody ever suspects the Inquisition.
Especially when it's the Christian Inquisition.
Inquisition, what a show.
Through this power and wealth, he acted the way that we would expect most powerful men to act. He indulged his carnal appetite, and he took many wives for himself, even more than the Quran actually allows, one of whom was a 9-year-old child bride, which history tells us still played with dolls at the time of their consummation. He personally bought, owned, and sold slaves. He mercilessly...
Now, wait, if we want to go there, if you want to go to the slavery thing, I feel the need to remind you that I believe there is explicit detail on the manner by which people are supposed to engage with slavery. So
that's different though, because it's different type of slavery. So that slavery is okay.
It's the good slavery.
Look, I just listened to this other guy on this other apologetic channel, and well, why didn't God just tell him, slavery's wrong? Well, because it's hard to change people's hearts and minds. Like, so you just make it a law. You just don't have slaves. That's really hard, God. Yeah, I know, but just don't do it.
Yes, but if he can tell you not to have mixed fabrics, not to have tattoos, and not to eat shellfish, he can tell you not to own another human being. How hard was that?
And to drag your unruly kid to the town border and stone them to death if they don't obey or whatever. I mean, come on. Oh, but God had to feed them a little bit, but then when God stopped giving them commands, why didn't he give them updated commands after some time or something?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's not. Yeah, it just
want to go. I'm just saying, if you want to go the slavery route, Christianity is not the anti-slavery religion.
Also, if you want to go the age route, where in the Bible does it tell you the age of consent?
It doesn't.
Nope, it's not in there. So
It doesn't say anything about consent, but it does say something about adultery, which
yeah, and it also says a lot of things about how you can, basically get a girl to be your permanent bride after raping her. But yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean,
I know
it was for a different culture. Those laws don't apply now.
Like, yeah, but then none of this other historical stuff you're talking about with Muhammad applies either. But
right,
when it comes to the adultery thing, if you don't have a consent thing set up, then you can have victims of rape.
And who's he to know? Maybe
participating in adultery without their consent. So
yeah, maybe Muhammad, blessed be upon him, was told that it was okay, to do this. So how does he know? Maybe Allah was like, "Hey, man." Why didn't you say Allah, blessed be upon him?
But also, I just remembered something about the whole 9-year-old thing, right? I have a question. Now, I don't know this, and I haven't been able to figure this out exactly. How old was Mary?
She's a young woman. Yeah, we're never told. Yeah, we don't.
Yeah,
she's
and
just a young.
God impregnated her.
Right. Well, that's okay because it's God.
But wasn't Mary married?
Yeah. Well.
So impregnating a married woman?
It's it's fine because listen, look, don't look over there. You're reading it wrong. You just want to sin. That's all it is. Yeah.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, I mean, well, of course, I came up with a rather crude way of explaining Mary's being a virgin and still having a kid. Involves a hairbrush, but I'll say, less said the better. But at any rate, it's the whole virgin thing that came later as a church idea because it was originally young woman, not virgin. So, and it's and then Jesus has brothers later, so it's clear she didn't remain a virgin, even if she started that way. Can you imagine being the brother of Jesus? Hey guys, I'm God. Yeah, that's nice, dude. Just what the hell? No, you're not.
They're not part God. They don't get that part divinity thing.
You see, I really need to get around one of these days to reading the Catholic stuff because
Also, I highly suggest the I think they're called the apocryphal books. So a lot of the non-canonical books, especially the ones that talk about Jesus's early life. Which
because what was he doing all that? Yeah, he was a kid for a while. Surely he had to,
Yeah, and they have documents about that. I always found that strange that nobody questioned that we just started in the middle of, by the way, Jesus is an adult now.
Yeah, he's 33 now. Now the story. Wait, what? What was that when he was a teenager? What was Jesus's first temple like? Come on, give me something to work with here. Come on.
Yeah, that also just leads to a lot of questions about documentation.
It's just so dumb. I think they have one where they only mention in the Protestant Bible at any rate is Jesus said something to his parents, he was kind of sarcastic with them, sort of. I can't remember now off the top of my head. And they were don't do that. And then he was obedient to them from then on or something. It's this very minor, quick story that just flies by, and then he's an adult. Whereas I think in the Catholic one, there's a story where he brings a frog back to life or something like that.
Wasn't there one where he cursed a fig tree?
That's when he's an adult. You would think that would be when he was a kid and didn't know any better. But no, that's when he's an adult. He's hungry. It's not the time for figs. And he's screw you, fig tree, die. And it's wait a minute. It's not the time for figs. Make it grow figs then. What? I mean,
this is Thanos to the extreme.
You had manna come from heaven at one point, and you can't make what's your problem, dude?
Well, he's God, but he's also a child, so he gets a pass.
No, but he's not. I'm telling you, the fig thing is when he is an adult.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's God, but he's also a young adult, so he gets a pass.
33 is no, actually that'd be old back then.
I know that's
the first century, wasn't the age maybe 40, 50-ish.
Well, you got to understand, like Adam and Eve lived like hundreds and hundreds of years.
No. Well, yeah, but that was before like that, and then some. Look, again, we're not getting into all that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make a ridiculous justification. But let's go back to the video so we don't get too off track.
Political enemies and adversaries, at one point executing hundreds of Jews, numbers as high as 900 they estimate. 900 Jews who had surrendered after a siege in Medina. He once tried to commit suicide, and he was eventually poisoned.
Didn't Jesus successfully commit suicide by police? I'm just asking questions.
Basically, yeah.
Especially since he told beforehand, he was like, yeah, I'm going to die. And then he made sure he died. That sounds like the same thing, but we'll keep going.
By a woman whose family he had killed in another siege. Now, maybe that doesn't bother you from a historical perspective. This is the...
From a historical perspective, keep in mind, historical perspectives are not moral perspectives. Why would that bother me from a historical perspective? If these are things that actually happened, these are things that actually happened. How I feel about them has nothing to do with whether or not they actually happened or how legitimate the accounts of these events are. So what's that got to do with this discussion?
I mean, yeah, and I went over this before, that somebody was saying, oh, you're assuming a materialistic framework because you look the way that you look at history. I'm like, well, what choice do I have? If I allow for supernatural to be a thing, then I have to grant all the mythologies. I can't just say, oh, this one's true, but the rest are false. I'd have to grant them all. I'd have to have some
sort through them and tell which mythologies were correct.
Like which one, I'd have to have some methodology for declaring which ones were actually happened and actually didn't happen, and how would you do that? And so I go, of course, when it comes to these miraculous claims, those are the bits that we're skeptical of, because we have no example of somebody coming back from the super dead. That we have people coming back from what we call dead, but not like the super mega dead that Jesus was, right? Like that was pretty dead,
Yeah, and that's why I'm willing to grow things for the sake of an argument, because even if we do, you have alternate explanations. So even if I grant Christianity as it happened, how do you know who was the good guy and who was the bad guy? Because as far as I'm aware, Satan doesn't really do that much in the Bible compared to
the tempter doesn't really do, like, at best I think the number was, I want to say 5 people that even if you single it down to one person called Satan, which came way later. The double idea came way later, but even if you did that, which you shouldn't, but it's like 5 with God's permission. Like, yeah, that's it.
And if you want to do that, you have to consider like different, because again, I don't want to get too off track, but like when you consider who was the good guy and who was the bad guy, of course, if you're reading God's book, he's going to tell the story as he is the good guy. And if you read Satan's book, it's going to say he is the good guy. But the thing you have to consider is in God's book, where he says he is the good guy, he drowned everyone on earth. In what story does the person who commits planetary genocide come off as the good guy to you? So I say all that to say, if we aren't looking at this from a historical perspective and you want to talk about moral problems, maybe you should start with your own religion and the moral problems there, at least the ones that I notice and that I am aware of. But like I said, don't want to get too off track.
Kind of cool thing we hear from great historical figures. But isn't that the point? If he truly was a prophet of God, someone who enjoyed direct revelation and intimacy with God, do you expect there to be something different about him from all these other historical characters that we are familiar with?
And there really isn't anything different. I mean,
but why would we expect anything different?
And different doesn't mean anything either. Like different in what? But he really isn't. I mean, nothing Jesus said or did was anything that somebody else hadn't already claimed or tried. It's just it's not it's fairly unremarkable, really.
Because even if you wanted to say, because he's hyper focusing on Muhammad specifically, even if you wanted to say all that stuff and say, well, wouldn't you expect Muhammad to be different if he was actually a prophet? And it's like, you have to consider
How?
Most
Why?
people
But
were
yeah, I
not
mean, like,
Muhammad, and most people were not doing
yeah, like
religious conquest
I
and
mean, you and I
all
are
of those
pretty
things.
different. Maybe we're prophets. Maybe we're the last two guys that are in Revelation that do whatever the hell it is that those two guys do. I don't know.
Yeah, but I just say that to say, like, when it comes to pointing out terrible or barbaric leaders, dictators, things like that, you have to understand that most people are not dictators, and most people are not barbaric leaders that lead religious massacre across the world.
Yeah.
That is something that happens on a much
See,
rarer basis.
what's also weird is, of course, the Jews were waiting for a savior, and still are, for a savior to fix all the political, the earth stuff, to make this world the perfect place. Like, that's what their savior is going to do. That's what they believe. And so here comes this guy, and he's like, no, peace, love, happiness, it's all good. I'm God. No, really, wink, wink, not really saying
Unless
that.
you're a money changer.
Yeah, unless you're a money changer, then screw you, whatever. But but then it's like all the then you've got the Pharisees. It's like those are the bad guys. Like, no, those are the guys that are like, you're not doing the thing that we were waiting for, so you're not the guy. He's like, yeah, but what about this? And he goes off into the story. And it's just like I want to do a film where it's like the guys are just rolling their eyes, going, oh my god, just kill him, shut him up, just to shut him up, It's like, no, if we kill him, they'll make him stronger. Leave him alone. Anyways,
He is a villain in a Ghostbusters movie. Hate makes him stronger. Keep going.
And yet, he acted and behaved in exactly the way that we would expect from someone who acquires great wealth and power.
We who? Because that might have been what you would expect, but that's not my first instinct. If I see someone gain great wealth and power, my first instinct is they're going to marry a 9-year-old. So I really want to know how you come to these sort of expectations and assumptions that you project onto other people. Because he does this a lot where he says we, but he really means him, and he doesn't demonstrate that it's anyone else other than him. It's just like, well, we would all expect him to love cheeseburgers. And it's like,
yeah, he didn't have wealth or power, though. That's the other thing, is that Jesus is like this. He's
talking about Muhammad right now.
Yeah, I know, but okay. I don't care about Muhammad. Peace be upon him.
He's trying to invalidate Muhammad and then say, well, look at how opposite Jesus is to Muhammad.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's like, so what? So, I mean, how do you know one's because you like one and you don't like the other?
Because one defiles expectations, and you would expect one who comes from God.
The thing is that Muhammad defies expectations.
That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah.
So it doesn't work.
That's why I made the example, but I'll let him finish his train of thought.
We get a contemporary glimpse of this in some of the dictators of the 20th century, people like Joseph Stalin, who was portrayed by the state and his propaganda machine as a man of the people, a compassionate and strong leader, when in fact he didn't seem to lose any sleep when he deliberately starved to death millions of Ukrainians, and when he...
Now, I find this interesting because this is one of the reasons why I say I don't necessarily agree that Jesus is a whole great moral teacher, right? So again, operating under Christian theology, assuming the miracles happened. Jesus had the whole bread miracle where he fed, I can't remember the number, but it was in the thousands. He fed a lot of people with like one loaf of bread that just kept infinitely splitting. So he had the cure to world hunger, and he only gave it to a select size of people and let everybody else who was presumably starving at the time starve. So it's like, whether it's healing or whether it's bread or whether it's any of that, he very well, in my opinion, there doesn't seem to be a clear reason, arbitrarily picks certain people to heal and certain people to feed, and then just leaves the rest to starve on their own. And so it's like, how is he any better? If I had the cure for world hunger and could feed everyone infinitely, I would. Jesus could and didn't do that. How do you reconcile that as being any different than this? In my opinion. Hoarding magical, mystical, miracle secrets for you and your friends, how does that make you a great moral teacher? Because you randomly sometimes help one person instead of all the people that needed to be helped. But that's just my moral hang-up. That's my gripe.
Purged countless associates, his own personal associates and people that he worked with, out of fear that he thought that they were political rivals or that they lacked loyalty, to the degree where they just started to disappear from photos and history books. This phenomenon of this flimsy facade that everyone could see through was summarized well by Elena Gorokova, who was a writer who summarized it in her memoirs after living under Soviet rule. She said, the rules are simple. They lie to us. We know they're lying to us. They know we know they're lying to us, but they still lie to us, and we still act like we believe them. The point is, these conspiracies, these lies, fashioned with huge amounts of resources and tons of willing accomplices.
Because Jesus definitely did have willing accomplices?
Still couldn't hold together, like I said before.
That depends on where you look. It's important to note that some people still have those mindsets from those regimes and still very much believe in them to this day. So it's not a matter of power or resources or how many people, stayed with it. It's a matter of whether or not it's true, because that's really what you're doing. You're not comparing it based on the accuracy or the facts or the truth. You're like, well, dictators act like dictators and Jesus didn't act like a dictator, therefore he couldn't have been a legend, which doesn't make sense. Or you're trying to say that his religion couldn't have been faulty because it wasn't faulty in the same way that these other people were faulty. But I have a lot of people from Jamestown that can attest to the faultiness of a cult that looks exactly like a religion. And just because most people don't accept it doesn't mean that, well, if we get a lot of people to believe it, then it can't be false, because a lot of people don't accept these dictators anymore, and a lot of people still accept Jesus, therefore Jesus right. Even though that's not how truth works, or that's not how discovering truth works.
Lies and falsehood are a fragile thing compared to the truth. So as an explanation about the claims made about Jesus, this is where this becomes a bit of a problem for me. Because the followers of Jesus, the so-called conspirators in this case, they had no wealth, no power, no political authority.
Neither do a lot of followers of Islam. Does that make them correct? Neither are the followers of a lot of different religions. That doesn't make them any less right or wrong. I don't know why you're bringing these things up.
No great sophisticated academic training to bring these great minds together to craft this conspiracy.
So, a lot of people would say that the conspiracy was crafted after the fact and not during, which, why couldn't that be a possibility? I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not going to say that for a fact. I'm just saying that the legend can be conceived after the events occur as well as during. Just because the individuals in the alleged events weren't conspiracy theorists doesn't mean that the people after the events weren't conspiracy theorists and didn't manufacture a conspiracy based on everything that happened before they were there. But, I'll leave that alone.
And by their own accounts recorded in the Bible, they were quite clumsy and unintelligent and cowardly.
Okay, if we were willing to assume the truth of the accounts in the Bible, wouldn't we already be Christians? I always find this interesting when people pull from the Bible and they try to use something from one part of the Bible to justify the other part. Like, if I was willing to believe any of it, why wouldn't I just believe all of it? Unless you're appealing to something outside the Bible, if the Bible is the basis and I was willing to believe the basis, I would already be a believer,
And
but
they were few in numbers. And somehow with none of these things, no wealth, no power, no political authority, no great intellectual capability, they were able to craft the most convincing conspiracy in history.
That's debatable to say that that's the most convincing conspiracy in history. But even then, like I said, it didn't have to be deliberate. They could have just been misled and wrong. And as I said, a lot of people who did have power and who did have influence and did have intelligence after the fact could have then used that to spread it. Just because Jesus didn't use his abilities to spread his legend doesn't mean that other people didn't. And just because the disciples didn't have wealth or power or the intelligence to contrive stories doesn't mean that people after the fact didn't have wealth or power to contrive these stories, especially when you consider that along the line somewhere some people decided which books were canon and which books were not canon, which indicates somebody had some degree of power, wealth, and authority to decide for an entire religion which books would be considered legitimate and which books would be considered illegitimate after the facts of the alleged events. So this doesn't apply because you have to consider people after the events, not just during the alleged events.
Surpassing all of these other examples that we've been talking about, and think about what this conspiracy entails. It's one thing to just make up a story, but it's
like this one.
Quite another to coordinate your story through hundreds of years of prophecy and religious tradition.
That's not what happened, though. So,
but even if it was, like, prophecy and religious tradition are fundamental things of religion. So,
and
what?
The question, well, I've asked this before, it's like, how do you know that Joe Schmo is a prophet until that, prophecy comes true? You wouldn't. So it's like, how do you know who to record, right? So exactly. you either record everybody that's claiming to be a prophet and then see who gets it right after the fact, or you go, no, this guy is the prophet. How do you know? Just because we said, that's it. So whatever he says he's going to come true. Well, eventually it's going to come true if it's possible to come true. So if they're big, and of course the prophecies that Jesus didn't fulfill the ones that the Jews are looking for, fulfilled ones that they weren't looking for, and fulfilled things that are also impossible to fulfill because locations and places that he went to didn't exist in history. But and he rode 2 donkeys simultaneously, and then he also lied down, and I don't know, he spun around on donkeys. I don't know, that maybe that one's not in there, but whatever.
What I find most perplexing is, like, you just point out things that other religions do and just ignore the fact that they do those things. Like, Islam has prophecies, and Islam also has religious traditions.
I didn't know
if it has propagated them for hundreds of years, just like Christianity, but he just ignores that one because
if you're able to pull up these pictures that I put here. There's under the thing in private chat, I said Matthew 16:25. There's a YouTube link, and then there's 2 links below that.
Yeah, I don't know why in private chat all of your messages overlap. So then it's I have no idea why it does that.
Okay, well, I'll just email it to you then. Whatever. Go on with the video while I do that.
Oh, wait, I think I got one up. I will just have to do something really quickly.
Because this is on topic, I swear. It's not a tangent. It's worth it. Stay tuned, everybody that's watching.
All 5 of you.
All 10, 20, however many people, I don't know. Is there anyone? I don't know. I don't have the...
There is no one. I can see.
Oh. I'm watching.
Me, so.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the Bible. In Exodus, it says you have to kill and destroy those who worship another god. But the Quran says, be righteous and act as justly to those who worship another god. However, of course, later in the Bible, or later in the Quran, it says to kill people that aren't Muslim. So it just depends what you pick. If you go to the other one, the arkykennedy.com link, the big one, I think it was the big one.
Let me see.
Or it might have been a small one.
You'd think I'd be an expert at screen sharing by now, but you'd be surprised.
I'm trying to
Okay, this one?
Yeah, this is good too. So there's a passage in the Bible that basically says to cover your face if you're a woman, and there's a passage in the Quran that says something like that too. So these things are pretty dang similar, in some places. And then you can, if you cherry pick verses, then you can make it seem like one is worse than the other. There's this one, there's 333 deaths in the Quran, but however many in the Bible. It's like, yeah, the Bible's longer, so of course it has more. Duh. The Quran's pretty short as far as such things go.
Well, you could just appeal to the flood, and by that.
Yeah, right. But even without that, of actual numbers that you could count. It's like, oh yeah, of course the book's gonna have more than the Quran. It's still so just depending on how you cherry pick it, you're gonna get different answers.
Yeah, the differences are not to say there are no differences, there are. However, the differences, in my opinion, don't matter to how true it is, just because it's different than something else.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that all of that is his own weird thing. But I don't want to wait too long. I will try to copy all of the links that you shared in private chat and put them in public chat for people who want to go back. I also want to say a disclaimer, and I'll probably say this at the end. To anyone, to the 5 of you that watch this after the fact, do not believe us. Do your own research on these things. Go look into these verses and look into the Bible, read the Quran, read as much as you can reasonably, but do not take what we say wholesale as truth. That would undermine the entire point of my channel. So please exercise skepticism on us the same way you should exercise skepticism on this guy.
What are you talking about? Speak for yourself. I'm always right.
Well, that's why I have to say it, because you won't.
That's right. Exactly. I'll say the opposite just to be the whatever contrarian something. Whatever.
Okay, back to it.
Because the Old Testament, which was the precursor to the New Testament and the testimony about Jesus, was a library of books written over hundreds of years by multiple authors and prophets and priests and kings. And it very subtly but convincingly points to Jesus.
Convincingly, he says. I would rather you focus on the convincing aspect than mentioning how many people made the convincing aspect.
The Old Testament makes dozens of prophecies about the Messiah, but in a very subtle and somewhat spread out way, such that
What's the difference between something being subtle and spread out versus it being vague? Because right now they sound very similar to me, at least of the prophecies I am aware of in the Bible.
And the scholars of that day, they weren't even really sure what the Messiah would look like or when he would come or what he would do. But yet somehow...
I don't believe that. I would refer to a Jewish scholar and would prefer to ask them. I don't believe they didn't know what the Savior or what the Messiah was going to look like.
How the disciples of Jesus were able to connect all of this through their writings of the New Testament.
Okay. This is an excellent point. They connected the after the fact. Can't anyone connect the dots after the fact? If you know anything about films or movies that share universes with other movies and sequels and things like that, a lot of people after the movies are done will make a lot of connections and have a lot of theories about how a lot of relationships unfold. But until they are actually confirmed by usually the movie itself or the authors or directors of the movie, they're just conjecture. They're just fan theories. There are a lot of fan theories about a lot of different things. And just because someone can make connections doesn't mean that the connections are correct or that they are accurate. Someone can come around and make the prophecies sort of kind of fit into some other kind of things that sort of kind of happened. But that doesn't mean that they were directly connected. And even if they were, a prophecy being fulfilled doesn't tell you how the prophecy was fulfilled, because you can't merely just say it's going to rain tomorrow and then it rains and then boom, I'm a prophet. Well, you have to know how the prophecy happened, and it has to be in a way that either isn't obviously predictable or isn't a way that someone can, make the prophecy come true on their own. So if Jesus prophesied that he was going to die and then did all that stuff to make sure he died, you can't give him prophecy points for that because he made it happen. So that's just my objection so far with this.
It said things like that Jesus would he would be called a Nazarene, would be born of Bethlehem, he would be born of a virgin. He would teach in a very specific way using parables.
Except for the times he didn't use parables, because Jesus doesn't always use parables. But again,
he doesn't prophesy that he'd be born a virgin. That's not in there. So I don't know where we're getting that from, but whatever. Yeah, sure.
And that's the skepticism. But here's something to consider when thinking about this, right? if we're trying to operate under the framework of Christian theology, you're God. You want to convey the legitimacy of your future son being God risen. Now, you could just, get around all that by convincing everyone you exist, but that's too easy. So you're going to make vague predictions or give people prophecies and then later fulfill the prophecies in a convoluted way, as opposed to just, convincing everyone you exist. It just seems a little bit too convoluted and unnecessary for a deity to get his point across by using prophecies when there are so many other more legitimate ways that he can convey information to people. As far as I'm aware, prophecies and predictions are not necessarily the most effective way to communicate ideas to people. It's actual demonstration. You say the thing and then you demonstrate the thing. But what he's doing is saying someone else will say the thing, but not really the thing. And then someone else will come along and then do the thing, but not do it in a way that people will know. And then people after that will have to make the connections between all these things.
It's so much more the hide and seek thing of like, oh, I'm gonna leave these little hints, and if you pay attention, then you'll know what the hints are. But if you miss it, well, And then this little tiny spot on the world, like the rest of the world doesn't get to know about any of this.
Unless you're a Mormon and you believe that Jesus went to America, which
that still leaves out the rest of the world though. That's Jerusalem and America, and then that's it. So
no, I know a lot of people say because a lot of things crossed over in America, they didn't need to, but that'll be a separate stream on Mormonism.
Yeah, I don't know.
And he would heal the sick.
Some of the sick. And that's the important thing. These things sound significantly worse when you think of them in context. So, yeah, he healed this again, assuming Christian theology is true. Yeah, he healed the sick. Some of them, the rest of them, he just left. Now, either Jesus didn't know they were sick, in which case, how didn't he know that they were sick? Or he did know and he just, left them there and didn't heal them. And even then, he knows everyone is hungry and he didn't feed everyone. So we run into so many different problems where these great moral things that he's supposed to have done are so arbitrary that it's like, yeah, you healed one person of being blind, but what about the other blind people? Or did Jesus just not think anybody else was blind? He just healed the one blind person in existence and was like, I'm done. I don't understand it. I don't understand the moral motivations behind the miracles.
They also said that he would be rejected by his own people and even his own followers, and that
a book that wants people to believe it is going to prophesy that it will be rejected. That's a thing. Like, it sounds like exactly what someone would do if they're trying to convince you, is to say, you're probably not going to believe me.
You won't believe me, but
and then continue to do it. And I've actually come across individuals in conversations like about this where I mention that I'm an atheist, and it's like, aha, the Bible mentions atheists and it says they're fools. And it's like, gee, a book that wants people to believe it is going to say that people who don't believe it are fools. What a coincidence.
I would have more fun if I'd been, I would have said, I don't know, people that don't believe this, they're the smart ones. And they'd be like, what? Like, see, you don't expect that. That's what makes it true.
Yeah, it's just, it's always so strange how they think a book being self-defensive, not demonstrating its points, but being self-defensive, like people aren't going to believe me, is good. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people try to use, I don't know if there's an official name for this, but they try to use what I like to call like the Einstein bias, which is like, whatever point they're trying to make, they can't be wrong, because all great geniuses in history where everyone shunned them and disagreed with them. So if people are shunning me and disagreeing with me, I must be a great genius just like they were.
Right.
They're impervious to criticism because they're like, who else was criticized? Einstein, and he was right. Do you know who else was told he wasn't good at something? Michael Jordan. Therefore, I'm great at astro
whatever
garbage physics.
That's kind of the Elton, what's his name? The Tesla, what's his face? What's the Tesla's name guy?
Nikola Tesla?
No. The the battery powered car guy. Sent the car into space.
I have no idea actually. If you find that out again, that would be a great
uh,
chat thing.
Hyperloop guy. Oh God, what's his face? Elon Musk. That's it.
Elon Musk. Yes.
I was like,
Why didn't I know who he was? Like, I
my
know that
brain
name,
just.
but
But here's this article. This is an example of this kind of cognitive dissonance where you read it and you go, how in the what? That's not the conclusion that I would draw. I don't know if you see that. It's the last thing I linked there. If you want to.
okay, I will. I just noticed we're at our 2-hour marks.
Yeah.
We're gonna go over. Because I do want to finish this. I just want to make sure we finish this before we get too side.
Oh, okay.
But at the
All right,
remind
just play
me
the
again,
video and we'll not see anything until the end.
remind me at the end to go through the things, or at least to put them in normal chat so everyone can see them.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
He would suffer and die. But again, because these things are all spread out and subtle in the Old Testament, it would have taken a brilliant and shrewd and knowledgeable scholar to try to connect and weave all of these things together so that they pointed to Jesus. And
so then why did God make it so hard and complicated that would be necessary? Why didn't he just make it easier to understand? This is the convolutedness I was talking about before.
So that their crafting of this false narrative would have to be just ironclad.
Ironclad? You think the Christian narrative is ironclad? Okay.
Think about like authors who write fictional stories and how they have to get lots of people going through the text to make sure that there's consistency between their characters and the stories and they don't accidentally contradict themselves.
Yeah, but the gospel contradicts itself. So, and as a quick example, again, I'm bad with verses, but I'll try to find them. There are 2 different accounts in 2 of the different gospels of women finding Jesus's tomb. One says that they ran away and didn't say anything to anyone, and the other says that they went and told people. So both of those can't be true. One of them has to be wrong, and then you have to justify that contradiction existing. You have to justify this blatant one part says something and one part says something opposite. It's also true of the Genesis account. There are 2 Genesis accounts, but things like that indicate to me that there are contradictions in the Bible in the same way that there are contradictions in other fictional stories. So why can't they be similar in that regard?
It's not easy to do. So are we to believe that Jesus' disciples, who were composed primarily of unsuccessful fishermen and tradespeople, were able
people who said they were unsuccessful fishermen and tradespeople, but could very easily have been lying. But okay.
To weave this very complex narrative, drawing from history.
You know what I find interesting? I just thought about this is a weird kind of belief and non-belief at the same time. So we're supposed to believe that these individuals were not as intelligent because the Bible says they weren't as intelligent, and then take that and say, well, then they couldn't have made up the story because the Bible says they were too stupid to make up the story of the Bible. It's so weird that you want us to not believe certain parts and believe other parts so then we can come back and believe the whole thing. It doesn't make sense that you're not applying skepticism to the entirety of the story as opposed to just some parts. If they say anything, you just believe it. But I don't know.
And prophecy and religion and theology and philosophy.
Also, as I mentioned before, not beating a dead horse, people could have done this after the fact. People who were way smarter and had more power and resources could have easily come back to the broken story and fixed it and cleaned it up and made it better. That's what a reboot is.
That seems like...
Sorry, that's what a good reboot is.
An absurd explanation on the face of it.
Is that more absurd of an explanation than a man coming back from the dead? Do you not see? Am I the only one that sees? Like I'm so confused as to how he looks at the idea that someone made a conspiracy theory. That's a hard sell. But a man came back from the dead. That is right. That is a easy sell. That's just believable. It's much more likely that someone, died and came back from the dead, as opposed to either faked their death or didn't exist. And I've heard that so many times when people are presented with alternate possibilities to the Jesus story, they just say they're absurd and just say they're ridiculous. And they don't explain why they're any more ridiculous than the actual alleged events. But I made a commitment to finish the video, and I will.
Next, they had to somehow make Jesus' body disappear in order to claim that he was resurrected from the dead.
And again, people fake their deaths all the time. So what's miraculous about that?
Of course, if they made this claim and someone could produce the body, well, there goes your conspiracy.
But if they fake their death...
And they had to somehow do this under the careful surveillance of Roman guards, the Roman governorship, and the Sanhedrin.
What? Why? Where do you get this information from? And if he says he gets it from the Bible, I swear I will end this stream right. Well, no, I won't, because I'm a masochist. But if I wasn't, I would end this stream right now.
Who were anticipating that they would do this very thing. Then they had to convince their temper.
Also, side note, why would the Romans allow Jesus to be buried in the first place? The entire point of crucifixion was humiliation and for the corpse to be put on display. They wouldn't allow the corpse to be taken off the cross to begin with. And if they were going to allow him to have a proper burial, why would they care about watching his buried grounds? How long were the Roman soldiers were they going to survey the tomb of Jesus? How long were they going to guard it, and for what purpose? Do you see how this doesn't make sense outside of the Bible saying that this is what happened? Can we get some Roman resources or sources or citations or reports that these actually were things that the Romans did and intended on doing around the same time? Because I don't believe that this was a common thing that people did with people they crucified, or the Romans did with people they crucified.
And all the people who had great expectations for Jesus based on the miracles that they had witnessed and the things that he was teaching, but then saw him die and were like, oh, I guess he's not who we thought he was. They had to convince all those people that Jesus actually came back from the dead.
Considering that they convinced those people that Jesus did miracles, I'm not convinced that was a hard sell for them.
And truly was the Son of God. And some had great success in recruiting these people.
A lot of people have a lot of great success recruiting people. What does that have to do with how right they are?
Now let's just indulge the conspiracy theory for a second here.
I'll be right back.
Wait, what'd you say?
I said, keep going. I'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
This never even existed, or if he did, he wasn't that well known, or that none of the things about him are really true. Put yourself in their shoes. So you, in the place and time where you lived, you have to go out and convince people that a great and public teacher who was publicly executed is now back from the dead and ascended into heaven, and that hundreds of people have witnessed this, and that you could go and ask any of these people yourself.
Yeah, this is alleged to have been what happened, but we don't know that this is what happened. This is what, as far as I recall, Paul said happened. So as far as I recall, it's not that we ourselves, the readers, could do this. It's that Paul said this was the thing he did to other people, meaning that we don't know if he actually did go to convince other people. We just know the Bible says that he went to convince other people, which is a fundamental difference. And if you can't tell the difference between the Bible says and it happened, that's the fundamental problem.
If the person you're talking about had never existed, don't you think your contemporaries, the people living in that place and time, would be like, I think we would have remembered a great public martyr that everybody was familiar with?
How do you know people back then didn't say that? Just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So just because someone wrote a book saying they did a thing and someone didn't write a book saying they retorted that doesn't mean that nobody retorted that. Everyone back then didn't just miraculously become Christians at the whim of the claim. There were plenty of people who didn't become Christians after this happened. So there are plenty of people who did exactly what you're saying, unless you think everyone around that time basically believed them. What about the Romans? You don't think the Romans said what you presumably are saying that someone who didn't believe would have said. A lot of Roman people probably said exactly that, but we're just ignoring that fact. Or you think the Romans just became Christians, or just were conveniently silent on the issue of a new spreading religion under their nose.
Who was publicly executed?
Public executions were not that uncommon in Roman at the time. So what difference does that make? A person was publicly executed. I don't even believe that Jesus was the only person publicly executed that day, whenever that day was, because it's not very specific.
But we don't know who you're talking about. That is not the kind of thing that would win a lot of sympathy. It's a lie that is easy to poke holes in, especially for people that live in that place and time.
Yes, and people who lived in that place and time did not miraculously become Christians. The spread of Christianity didn't just become global and worldwide at that time. It took a long time for Christianity to really spread to a significant portion of the world. So the point that I'm making is you are describing something that seems to be exactly the way things happened. A lot of people had an uphill battle to convince people of things. Some people believed them and some people didn't, which is exactly what we would expect.
But new followers they were gaining by the thousands, which I don't think would have happened.
Citation needed. When were these new followers being gained? And who was gaining them? Like, really? And I'm very serious. I don't do gotcha questions on this channel. Citation needed.
If it would have been as easy as pointing out that this Jesus guy you're talking about, who's supposedly back from the dead now, who you claim was publicly with...
It's also worth noting that there are a lot of religions that gain popularity by the thousands, and there are a lot of cults that gain popularity by the thousands. There are a lot of political parties that gain popularity by the thousands. You bring this up as if to say, well, they were really convincing to a lot of people, therefore they were right, or therefore they weren't lying, or therefore it wasn't a conspiracy. How many conspiracy theorists do you think there are? There is an entire flat earth society, and there are people who can see the round earth from the NASA website. So explain to me how people's gullibility is proof of anything, because convincing me or convincing the average person that the earth is flat after being taught that it's round would be a hard sell. Yet we have entire flat earth societies being built out of it. That doesn't make it right, or accurate rather.
Fanfare executed in front of all of us. We've never even heard of him until now. So clearly Jesus existed, and
clearly Jesus didn't exist, because the Bible says some people agreed with the people who wrote the Bible. Again, without using any extra biblical sources, you're basically saying the Bible says people believed the people who wrote the Bible, or the people who wrote the Bible said that people... Let me rephrase that because I'm getting confused. The people who wrote the Bible said in the Bible that they talked to people who believed them. That's essentially what that means. And you're like, well, if they were lying, then people would have refuted them and not been believers, which some of them were, because everyone didn't just become a Christian, unless you have evidence that everyone just changed their minds. So, and even then, wouldn't that be bad? Wouldn't that be extremely poor? You just demonstrate that this is not a good reason to believe him or whomever was telling these people about Jesus, yet they believe them anyway, and you're just like, well, heck, I'm gonna go along with it. It's not a really good convincing case, but heck, I'm gonna just go along with it because nobody else said it was wrong, so it's right, apparently.
People were familiar with him. So the next thing you'd want to do is scrutinize this claim.
How many people claim to be familiar with someone has nothing to do with how true they likely are. Again, people have this conversation with God all the time where everyone attributes different attributes to God and says everyone else is wrong. There's no seemingly way to tell who's right or prove that a God exists, because the way the evidence is presented here is as if, oh, well, a lot of people, seem to know who Jesus was, so it wouldn't make sense if he didn't exist for people to know who he was. However, the same can be said about God, where a lot of different people claim they know who God is, yet would go as far as to say your version of God is wrong or your version of God doesn't exist. Just because a lot of people agree that there is a God and then disagree about the details doesn't mean that then there must have been a God, because a lot of people agreed there was a God. Because a lot of people can be wrong.
They claim that there are hundreds of witnesses of this resurrection of Jesus coming back from the dead. Well, that should be something that's fairly easy to scrutinize it. And so they did. And it held up to that scrutiny. They weren't able to discredit it based on that ground.
Not being able to discredit something is not the same thing as verifying it. If we don't have the ability to discredit whether or not the earth is flat, that doesn't mean that the earth is flat. Someone comes along and makes a stupid theory about why the earth is flat. Me being a non-scientist and a layman, being unable to scrutinize that then doesn't make them right by default. It's the justifications and the demonstrations of the person making the claim that make them right or wrong, not the ability of others to scrutinize them or not. Just because no one tells you you're wrong doesn't mean that you're wrong, or doesn't mean that you're right. Just because you can't find anyone who can prove you're wrong does not mean that you're right by default.
Lastly, since nothing else was working to suppress this movement, they threatened them with imprisonment, torture, and even death if they didn't recant their story.
Citation needed. Nice comeback. Perfect timing.
Apologia went over this. Like, no, of the disciples we know about, they didn't ever have that chance. So there's nothing that suggests that any of the disciples ever were put in this position in the first place. As far as other believers, I don't think there's anything written on other believers. The best maybe you could do would be early church tradition or history or something like that, and then you're looking at a biased source to get your information from. So as a skeptic, you're like, well, I mean, it's coming from the church. How much do I really believe that this is an actual thing somebody said at some point?
I'm willing, like, if the church had a separate demonstration and the church said we are right because X, Y, and Z, I would look at X, Y, and Z. The problem is he's not telling me the reasons why the church does it. He just says the church said so.
Yeah.
On its own is not good enough.
There doesn't appear, as far as I know, there are not records of people getting put into this position of repent or else or die. Now,
exactly.
Loving Jesus was illegal, or worshiping Jesus might have been illegal for a time because Rome, had whatever its god was that they worshipped. Jupiter, I want to say, maybe, I don't know, whatever it was. And then the guy that was in charge of Rome decided, let's just make Christianity the thing, for whatever reason. Maybe he was convinced, maybe he thought it would give him more power. Who knows? But at any rate, once it became the standard, now you have to worship this. Well, then, yeah, everyone went along with that
and that is the point at which you could get all the stuff he was talking about, like the conspiracy theorying and having to have a lot of power and resources to make it make sense. Yeah, Christianity being the national religion entails all of those things. You'd have smart people trying to rationalize the Bible. You would have a lot of people in power enforcing, prayer and things like that. You would have a lot of resources to manage the believers in this regard. So again, like I said, it's very easy to retcon after the fact. Just because you don't believe people were smart enough to do it at first doesn't mean no one in between now and the original timeline retconned all the stuff to make it make sense after the fact.
Even if you had thousands upon thousands of people who died for this belief, that doesn't make the belief true. We've said this many times. This is something that's like, look,
the death of other people from other religions who
they didn't recant
for their beliefs.
That
doesn't make them. That doesn't make them right.
How many recanted during the different tortures of the Spanish Inquisition? We don't know. A lot of those records are lost, so it's hard to say. But it's like, is it a little or is it a lot? I don't know. But you would say, okay, well, here's they might capitulate just to avoid torture, or they might not, because if they really think it's true, then they'll they'll hold on to it, and so it's been shown both ways. It's been shown that torture is ineffective, and it as far as getting information, and it's also it depends upon the person, depends upon the thing, and all this,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been shown to be a way to get people to uh, own up to X, Y, or Z, or if they do, then that's tainted anyways because maybe they're just telling you what you want to hear. So
Exactly.
so it's completely ineffectual. It's like, but you don't have the records of anybody that did this anyway. So
Exactly.
you have a false assertion, and then on top of that, you have this idea that under torture, people would just say, no, no. The truth is, I never saw that. But why? Why would they do that? They're still going to get killed. They're still probably going to get tortured. There's no there. This is a no-win situation.
Hmm.
You
And
know.
and even then, he was saying before that, he was saying, well, if it was a legend, right, then
Mm.
people who existed at the time would have been able to disprove it easily, and
Yeah,
that
but
would have just been the end of it.
what makes you think that people didn't try to do that?
Exactly. And I was saying, like, so I was trying to
The
say,
people
so
that tried to do that weren't Christians, and they were ignored by the Christians.
exactly. And
Yeah.
my point was, like, so do you think, like, everyone just became a Christian, or like do you think, like, as soon as people said the story, they just went like, well, everyone's a Christian now?
Yeah.
Or did you ignore all of the Romans that you were
Well,
just
but there
talking
was
about?
this 500 whatever number of people that saw this. Yeah, really? Names? Do we have names? No. Well, there's like I think somebody said that they had a couple of names, and I'm like, really? Oh, 2 names? Wow, out of the 500. But the reason I tried to emphasize the 500, I think it's 500. I don't remember now.
Yeah, it's
That's
500.
is it okay? Is numerology. Numerology is a big thing for Judaism, and I think early Christians also was kind of a thing too. So I suspect, I can't prove it, but I suspect that number has something to do with numerology. That's why it's that number. It's like, well, wasn't it 554? Like, how did you get this just exact count? Isn't that rather convenient? It's exactly 500 people. Like, oh well, but it doesn't say that. No, but it does say that. It says 500 people, and
But
the other
even then,
500, it doesn't name them, doesn't tell you where they live. So how is Joe Schmo? You tell him, oh, there's these 500 people, and it's like, you know who I'm talking about? Like, no, like, why don't you tell me where they live? Like, are they actually going to do any investigation into this? Why would they? They
exactly.
believe in all sorts of things already. They already believe in other gods that are around at that same time. Yahweh was one of many different gods that people worshipped at that time. Of course, Azeroth got written out, but whatever. So
Yes.
they already have a belief.
And
Uh, so why would you think for a moment that they are going to suddenly be skeptical of this idea, especially the selling point? If you're a Jew and you're told, hey, look, all that, you keep having to go to the tabernacle and make that sacrifice, and that costs you, that's money. Okay, that
yes.
basically, because there is kind of money, but they're also still sort of the barter system. Kind of, it's like, I think they were kind of like both at that time. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong about that. But at any rate, the sacrifice was money. It's your best pig or your best cow or best chicken or whatever the hell it is. But it's the best thing that you produce. And instead of that going to feed your family or being sold for whatever that you need, you have to go to the temple and kill it every however often. So the selling point is, look, you don't have to do that anymore, and you're still okay because you have this alternative that's completely free. You don't have to sacrifice anymore because the ultimate sacrifice was done. It's paid for. You're good to go. That's a great selling point. So yeah, I'm signing up for that. Sure. Now I don't have to go to the temple. I can still worship God and still believe in God, but I don't have to make these sacrifices that cost me money. You know,
But
Sounds good. Then of course later on the church is like, oh yeah, by the way, 10%. We need 10% of what you make.
yes, that's the time. But that the thing is, it's not even as direct as it seems, because
No,
we're
no, no.
talking about
Yeah, yeah.
accounts of accounts. We're not talking
Right,
about
right.
accounts.
But I'm
So we're
just
not
saying
talking
that.
about, we know 500 people saw it. We just don't know which. We know someone said they said, someone said they talked to 500 people, but we can't.
And there are 500 people there that saw this event. And it's but I mean, that's a large number of people. I would think that somebody else would have noticed that and written about it.
Exactly. And it's very odd that he mentions, he's like, well, no one refuted it and a lot of people believed it. And I'm like, just because just because you wrote a book saying someone else said they talked to 500 people agreeing with you and nobody wrote a contrary book that said you were wrong doesn't mean that you're right.
Well, nobody's refuted the lobsterist, so obviously it's true.
If no one can prove you wrong, therefore you must be right.
Right. It's dumb. It's like, until science can cure my illness, then I'm not gonna. I'm gonna keep being a believer in God because that makes sense. Like what? What? What's one thing to have to do with the others? No connection.
Exactly. So,
anyways, but yeah, this isn't the case for anything. This is. I'm gonna pretend that the story as written is what actually really happened. And then I'm going to say there's no other way to explain it other than the way that I want it to be explained. And then I'm going to say the things that try to explain it away, those are just wrong. End of story. It's like, what? The liar, lunatic.
That's not enough on its own.
It's like, okay, so
they're right. So you thinking you're right doesn't make you any more likely to be right.
How many people have to die under torture for something to become true?
Mm-hmm. How many people had to believe before that was credible?
Right. So,
well, if they would have stopped at 300, would that make the story better or worse? Would it make it more believable or less? And he's extending on that. He's saying that Christianity gained following by the thousands. And I really want to know when I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm saying when exactly did that happen? Because I strongly doubt that happened right as the events happened.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say because there's so much money to be made on the stories being true that Jerusalem is essentially a tourist trap now. You get to follow the path of Jesus. So actually finding real archaeology about any of this, it's going to be a Herculean task. You're going to have to dig up sites that nobody wants you messing with.
Exactly.
There's churches there that will claim that they have disciples underneath the church, buried underneath. Of course, nobody gets to look at them, but they totally, it's like, oh wait, how do you know? It's like, where's Jesus's bones? How would you
know his tomb? I still don't have an answer to that.
But how would you identify it? Even if you thought it's like, oh, here's Jesus' bones. How do you know? I don't.
How would you? Same thing with the tomb, where this was where he died, and it's like, how do you know?
Because it's a good spot for it.
Anyway. Well, let's keep going. We're almost done.
Again, put yourself in the shoes of the conspirators here. Would you suffer torture and death for a lie that you fabricated with really ambiguous motives? You haven't gained anything from it.
It might not be obvious what the motives are to you, but that doesn't mean that the motives are mysterious. And even if they are, that doesn't mean that the person didn't do the thing. So there are a lot of crimes where you can't get into the mind of the criminal. You can't fabricate why someone would do such a horrendous, torturous thing. That doesn't mean they didn't do it. A lot of people do a lot of things for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of people do a lot of different things knowing what the consequences are and still choosing to do them. Or are you trying to validate everyone from every other religion who has died for the sake of that religion? Because at the end of the day, like I said before, I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding. While I'm not saying it couldn't have been deliberate, that's not my personal position. My position is that that's what happened, is that they were wrong. There are lots of people in Jamestown who drunk the Kool-Aid, as the phrase has become coined, but that doesn't mean that because they did that, well, why would they drink the Kool-Aid for something they knew was a lie? Therefore, it must have been true. No, they could have just been wrong. They could have been deceived. Yeah. Some of them could have known it was a lie and were just trying to get the others to do it.
He's positing that person X made up the story in full. Okay, so the person then supposedly gets captured and put on the torture rack. And, it's like, okay, admit that this is false. It's like, okay, well, here's the problem. If he doesn't admit that it's false, if he does admit it's false, he's gonna get killed. He's toast. If he doesn't, he's still toast. There's a no. This is a no-win. So if he goes down as a martyr, then history will at least remember his name, maybe. Not, and so at least if he sticks with the lie that he knows he made up, then maybe he has a chance at sort of immortality. And that's just assuming he knows that he made up the whole thing in the first place. But then you're saying, well, hundreds of people made it up. No, you only need one person to make it up. And
Exactly.
and even that person might convince themselves that what they said is actually true. So they might not even know that they're lying after a while. Like you see this with
Precisely.
you look at the different people that James Randi tested back in the day where they came on the show and fully expected to be able to prove their powers and none of them could. And it's like they're like, oh wow, I guess the test is wrong, or that this isn't, maybe you can't, science hasn't caught up to this yet, or or the one guy with the box, like, would you let an electrician see what's inside the box? No way. Yeah, of course not, because he'd see that it's a fraud, right? So they might at some level know that it's a fraud, but at some other level they've done it for so long, or that they can't admit to themselves that it's a fraud. So this is human psychology. You're trying to resolve this tangled mess of, well, why wouldn't somebody just tell the truth when they're being tortured? Because there's all sorts of potential reasons, but you don't even have the example of the person being tortured, so it doesn't really matter. So you're asking a
And
non
like you said,
question. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you said, there's no way to tell which ones. So even if we were to go, because like I said, I'm more of the they were genuinely deceived rather than they were collaborators of a conspiracy theory route. But let's say I was, you don't know who the conspirators were and who were the deceived. All, like you said, all you need is one person to convince people, and then those people will take that conviction around. It can
Yeah.
still be a conspiracy, it can still be made up, but as long as at least one person knows, nobody else needs to know. It's still a
Yeah.
conspiracy.
You have the great example of Joseph Smith. Absolutely had to know that he was making all that stuff up. But at some point, maybe he convinced himself that it was true. Because he could have just recanted and said, no, I made it all up. And maybe he'd stay in jail, but he wouldn't have gotten killed.
Assuming he didn't genuinely, believe it in the first place, which is
Yeah,
possible.
well, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, he was a con artist, so, but maybe this con was so elaborate that after a while he started believing it. But regardless, he tried to escape his second story jailhouse window, and as he's falling, he got shot on the way down. So, you know, people didn't like the guy. So, well, if he died for his beliefs, does that make Mormonism true? And plenty of Mormons got all sorts of persecution early on. So, it doesn't,
Persecution doesn't make you right,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. And look at Ron Hubbard. He knows it's all BS, but he made his money. That's that. Then
Mhm.
he,
Yeah,
that's,
but any
Oops, sorry.
power, wealth, or honor, or child brides, if that's what you're into, all you've gained is trouble with the authorities.
Okay, and this is my biggest thing is if someone is retconning the story after the fact and that person is the authorities, this is where the conspiracy theory kicks in and all of your explanations fall apart. Even if the people originally themselves didn't recant their stories or whatever, someone after the fact could come along and propagate the stories and make all of it make sense. And they can say all of these things happened with these people who allegedly died for their beliefs, and they don't face the risk. What I'm trying to think. Not prophets, apologists today who go around saying that this happened in terms of like all of the followers were tortured and they never recanted and things like that. They are telling that story and they have no motivation to recant or anything. They have all of the benefits to gain. They have all of the motivation to gain. It doesn't matter if the original disciples didn't have anything to gain from it. The people propagating the story now have something to gain from it. And that is where the aspect of it being a conspiracy theory comes from. Even if the originals didn't have the conspiracy in their head, someone after the fact could have made it a conspiracy when it was beneficial to them. And there were a lot of people who were Christians who used that influence in powerful ways that benefited them and the spread of the religion as a whole. But trying to stay on track, trying to actually finish the video.
And these are the same people who publicly admitted in their own testimonies that when Jesus was arrested and tortured and executed, they all ran away for fear that they couldn't even watch it. And now suddenly these are the people who are standing up to that same threat.
It's almost like the story's characters are inconsistent, but we're not going to actually analyze that. I feel like if he knew this was a fictional book, he would call this out because the characters are behaving in ways that are inconsistent for no good reason. Yet, because he thinks it's real, the characters behaving in ways that are inconsistent makes the story more likely to be true. Inconsistent characterization in comic books is a bad thing because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make the story more relatable or more realistic, because people in real life don't go from "I can't watch that" to "I'll die." That's just not how that, generally speaking, works. But even if it did, I'm just saying I don't think he's being consistent. But I could be wrong. I don't know how he looks at comic books and movies and stuff.
What could possibly compel them to behave this way? In defense of a lie? Really? You think that they would suffer torture and death for a lie?
Or they were genuinely deceived by the lie and believed it. Why is that not an option he's willing to explore or accept? He's almost tiptoeing around the alternative, air quotes, conspiracy thing of they were just wrong and genuinely misled and genuinely deceived. And I don't think he's considered the possibility that someone could retcon the Bible and the stories and the accounts after the fact. But I think he's almost deliberately edging around the aspect of maybe they weren't lying, but they were also still wrong, because lying and being right are not the only two options, but he's treating them like they are here.
Along with hundreds of... Because that's what they did.
Alleged co-conspirators, but go on.
They all met a gruesome fate. St. Peter was crucified upside down because he was unwilling to die the same way that Jesus did. St. Bartholomew was skinned alive. St. Stephen was stoned to death. And St. Paul was beheaded, and the list goes on and on.
Okay, says who? Where do you get these accounts from? Where are your sources? Because you can say all of these things happened, but you're not telling us any Bible verses or sources or anywhere that we can look this information up. You're just saying these are a bunch of things that happened. And considering that I couldn't find this information on my own, this does me no good.
So among the rival explanations for who Jesus was and what he did, we have he was a lunatic, a liar, a legend, or the Son of God.
Hey, he did put legend in there.
Yeah, he did. He did put legend in there.
Fairly unlikely, as we've already discussed.
Lunatic and liar are fairly unlikely, as he says, but he didn't really explain why. He's just, he couldn't have been a liar and he couldn't have been a lunatic because reasons. I legitimately, correct me if I'm wrong, but I legitimately missed the whole lunatic thing and him being a lunatic and that not being a valid explanation. I genuinely don't know how he got around that one. The liar thing, I think that's what he did with the whole bringing up Muhammad and all that comparative stuff, which is nonsense because none of that has nothing to do with whether or not he's lying or genuinely wrong. So I fail to understand whatever his alleged explanations were for why liar and lunatic were invalid.
The third one is based on this idea that his followers crafted this very sophisticated conspiracy, this fabrication.
His followers didn't need to be the ones that created it. People after the fact could have been the ones that created it. Why is that an option you're not exploring? And why aren't you exploring the option that maybe some of his followers did and the others were genuinely deceived?
Even though they had nothing to gain by it and everything to lose.
But the people after the fact have everything to gain by it and nothing to lose, like you.
And they did lose everything by it. And why would they do that? It's so unprecedented.
Is it? people dying for things that they believe that are not true is unprecedented, especially in the ancient world? Do you think all the other Romans who died for their beliefs, do you think that's the same? Do you think no Roman was ever like tested or captured or tortured for their beliefs from a rival nation or something? And even if they weren't, the point is to say that it's unprecedented. That's unbelievable to me.
That I think it deserves to be dismissed as quickly as it's conceived.
Yes, but the idea that a man rose from the dead, that we can't dismiss that out of hand. We have to be very, very meticulous about the idea that a man came back from the dead.
Lastly, in closing, I want to address a common rebuttal that comes to us regarding this question of the apostles and why they would die for these convictions. Because
Okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe he is going to address that perspective.
people will point out that lots of people will go to their death for political or religious beliefs. That doesn't make those beliefs true.
Yes.
True, but we're not talking about a religious belief or a faith-based belief in this case.
What?
Huh?
He said we're not talking about a religious or a faith-based belief.
Yeah, I heard it. Just keep going. I want to see what he says.
Okay.
We're talking about an eyewitness testimony.
No, you're not.
No, you're not. You're talking about alleged eyewitness testimonies. You're talking about people who said, as far as I am aware, the earliest accounts of the Bible come decades after the alleged events, and the people who wrote these accounts were not eyewitnesses. Not to mention the fact that, as far as I'm aware, the Gospels, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're all anonymous. We don't actually know their names. So all of this is coming from anonymous sources who are not eyewitnesses, saying that they had contact with people who said they were eyewitnesses. So no, we don't have eyewitnesses in this case. You have people who said they met people who said they were eyewitnesses. But do go on.
Followers of Jesus were doing. They weren't making claim to something that they hadn't themselves observed. They were claiming to have been eyewitnesses of the resurrection of Jesus
It
themselves.
changes nothing.
It changes nothing. It changes nothing. If I had a personal experience right now where I claim to pass away and see nothing on the other side, that wouldn't verify anything. Oh, but you're an eyewitness, so it's not faith-based. You claimed you saw it. You saw the nothingness on the other side. That wouldn't mean that there is nothingness on the other side, whatever that even means.
Yeah, I mean, all the people that saw the UFOs and all this, you know, I mean.
That doesn't the people that see I think I brought this up as you were away, but the people that see the flat earth, that doesn't make it right. We all most of the time see a relatively flat earth, but that does not mean that the earth is in fact flat. Even if they were eyewitnesses, they could still very much be wrong, because us as eyewitnesses to the flat earth are wrong in that regard, unless you go to those kind of things.
Well, I saw it, and then I make a claim, and then that
means it's not faith-based or religious, even though it's about religion and a man being a god.
You've got hundreds of different Hindus or whatever, maybe not Hindus, but they'll say, I saw the guru levitate, and you can go and see a guru levitate. Of course, you're not allowed to look how to see he levitated, but you could see it.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, oh, look, I saw the guru levitate. I did. Here's a film of it. Amazing.
You know what? This makes me wonder. Has he ever seen a magic trick in real life? Because you can see a magic trick. That doesn't mean that it's any more legitimate. And you can say, well, it's not religious or faith-based.
Yeah,
but that's not the point.
I saw the woman got cut in half.
Exactly. But the point isn't that it is specifically religious or faith-based, even though when it comes to the origin of Christianity, it very much is. Even if it's not, we're talking about validity and we're talking about legitimacy. And you cannot verify or dismiss skepticism of a magic trick on the basis of, well, we're not talking about religion. We're talking about I saw the man fly right in front of me.
This goes into the how many people need to have said that they saw X and then die for that idea before you think that idea is true. It wouldn't work on anything else, would it?
I don't think
one person did it. Okay, well that's not enough. Okay, 100 people, 1,000, 20,000. Like what? How many people have to do this before you say, well, then I guess that has to be true, right? It's
or at least it increases the legitimacy or
whatever.
something.
Like,
Where does the
it's
change come in at?
an appeal to what popularity of people that are willing to die for the thing that they claim to have seen. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not how you find out what's true.
Exactly.
Eh,
But
yeah,
we're almost done.
I get it. You're gonna interrupt like 10 more times.
Yes, I know. I've given up on that because
Keep going.
sometimes,
Shut up. Just do it. Just play.
yeah, I'll do it.
And all together. Imagine if you have a court case in which dozens of eyewitnesses come forward and they say that they would die for the honor of their testimony.
That wouldn't make whatever their testimony was legitimate. Because if they were willing to die for their testimony that they were already dead and their ghost walking around, that wouldn't make it legitimate or right.
That's how convinced of it that they all are. I think most
How convinced you are has nothing to do with how right you are.
reasonable people would look at that and say, well, yeah, these are credible witnesses.
No, they're not. How confident someone or something is has nothing to do with how credible they are. The Creation Museum is very confident in itself and very much still wrong.
That's a far different thing from people who are willing to die for something that they don't actually know about. They just believe in it. And that's the difference between...
How do you know whether they know? Because now you seem to be making an arbitrary distinction between you saying, well, the Christians, they were eyewitnesses. They knew. But the Muslims, they didn't know. They just believed. And it sounds like you're just putting everyone else in a different category and dismissing them based on that arbitrary category that you made up because you know who knows something and who doesn't know something.
Followers of Jesus who died for their faith and people who died for other causes. Then he probably was the Son of God.
No. What line of reasoning could possibly justify the ending of then he probably was the Son of God?
Then why is that so hard for us to believe?
Because I don't. This video might break me. This might break me. This might be the second video I don't make it through because last week they had a ridiculous video I didn't make it through. But I as quickly as I can. It's hard to believe for a lot of reasons, but the primary reason is because that the justification is incredibly flimsy and weak, and that the primary, if not the sole justification, comes from the people making the claim and not from any extra source. It's just people saying they saw the person that said they saw the thing that happened. That's why it's so hard to believe, because it's much more common and much more understandable that a person faked their death, were a part of a cult, were a part of a conspiracy theory. Those things are incredibly common and much easier to understand than a man came back from the dead. But keep going.
Just because it's a supernatural claim?
Yes. Yes. If you want to be honest, yes, that is the basis. And not even that, not just because it's a supernatural claim, but because the evidence of the supernatural claim is incredibly flimsy and only came from people who said they saw the thing that someone else said they saw.
Most people already believe in God. That's already a supernatural claim.
So presumably this is engaged with atheists.
Only 33% of the world believes in your type of God, so...
But he's talking about God in general. But even then, so what?
Yeah.
They already believe in God. Not to mention the fact that different gods have different definitions. So just because they believe in the same word you do doesn't mean they believe in the same concept that you do.
That's what I'm saying.
But even if they did, even if they didn't, this video presumably is made for people who aren't believers, including atheists. So atheists, this just straight up doesn't apply to.
Has he ever responded to anything at all made by anybody else?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Not surprised. All right. Make it to the end.
All right.
It shouldn't be so hard for us to believe that God, in order to reveal himself to us and to close the gap between him and us, would send his son.
God had a son. Let's pause right there, not for too long, because like you said, finish the video, but God had a son. So you are looking at this, like he said before, look at the perspective from the perspective of the people in the Bible. You're God. You want to reveal yourself to people, and somehow, for some reason, you just have a son lying around and you decide to send him down to earth on a suicide mission. and you think that's the most effective way to convey and reveal yourself to people. Never mind the fact that people already believed in a God back then, but you want more people to believe in a specific human God. So you just grab your son and send him down to earth on a suicide mission by impregnating a Palestinian woman.
I don't know. If it was me, I'd just appear to every person simultaneously, speaking in their native tongue. And I'd say, hey, how's it going? Whatever your name is. I'm God. Here's how I work. Here's how you work. Here's how reality works. Now look at us. We are up in the sky flying around. This is the universe. This is what molecules are. What else do I need to do? I want you to know I'm God. So just, oh, but wait, I already know what you need me to do because I know what you're thinking. So here's that.
Yeah, and being able to convince people is a very simple thing. It's not, unless he thinks convincing someone is impeding their free will or whatever. There's no reason God can't just convince us the same
Why
way
couldn't you just say, oh, we all believe in the same God in the same exact way? Boom, done. There you go.
Because lots of people are trying to convince you. God can do whatever he's trying to do in this video. God can do supremely better and with infinitely greater effectiveness. But he's not, and that's the problem.
If you're going to send one person down, which I don't know why it would be just one, but whatever, then have that person stay around and be like immortal. So like you go, well, there's a have you he's toured the entire world talking to people and and trying to bring peace, and they shoot him sometimes, but the bullets just don't work. They've tried to kill him a number of times, it just doesn't take. They cut off his head, but he just grows a new one, and then whatever. It's just
exactly.
There would be, I will say, there would be a few people that would say, it's some sort of conspiracy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be the exception. The most amount of people would say, yeah, I mean, this is amazing. This is insane,
But even then, God could just do that. He could just get off the cross and then be like, okay, this was fun for a while. He puts his head back on, but says, all right, like, for real, I'm done playing around. I am God. And then they're like, convince me. And then he convinces them because he's God and he can do anything. Yeah. And it's like, okay, who's next? Person comes up, convinces them. Person comes up, convinces them.
You could disassemble their molecules and reassemble them. They go, how'd you enjoy that there?
And you're like, I don't know. I didn't feel anything. You kind of disabled my pain receptors. And it's like, oh, yeah. But, yeah.
I mean, hell, Thanos convinces people that he has power far more easily. Because he actually goes, hey, look what I do. And it's like, yeah, you're doing that. Because you're using these stones or whatever. But, I mean, it's obvious. It's evident, right? And
it's abundantly more evident than if Thanos, instead of doing what he wanted to do, he like created a secondary person and then sent that person into the universe to collect half the stones that he already had. It would just be so much more needlessly convoluted than him doing it himself, which is basically the point of the God thing.
Yeah, he did sit back for a while, letting other people go get the stones and bring it to him. But then he decided, no, I'll do it myself finally, But yeah, I mean, that's like a powerful being can do, well, I don't know, anything that's possible for it to do. And yet it chooses the most incoherent way that you could hope to think of. I only reveal myself after, let's see, how many years since when did humans become human?
According to the creationists, you have
right. We're gonna ignore them. You have a million some odd years before humans are human, right?
No, I'm saying if we're accepting the Christian theology, then it would be about 4,000 years from the
even then. You still have all these people that don't know what God is because God's not interacting with them. He's only selected a handful of people.
Yes, and go ahead.
That is the story of all the gods. Is we're the chosen ones, we're the special ones, we're the God revealed itself to us. Now, of course, you have the humility angle that the Jews try to do. Like, well, we weren't special. God picked us because we were so unspecial. Yeah. Your humbleness is showing there, but this is still, not going with the creationist thing because that's just nonsense. Just millions upon millions of years pass before God decides to reveal itself to two people, I guess, because he picks two people to represent. Well, actually, he picks one person and then clones that person to have a representation of humanity, I guess. And then, well, you can't. You know what? You can't make sense of it.
Yeah, that's why I said, like, you, to a certain extent, you have to take the framework into account, and even then, that's the biggest problem. Is even if I accept part of the framework, it's still internally inconsistent.
Yeah, because you still only have a few people that are being told about any of this, and everyone else is just left to their own devices. So it's
yes, and it's like for Moses, for example, instead of just now I understand the whole Prince of Egypt thing. They all got away, blah blah blah.
right.
But at the end, where God gives the commandments, instead of coming down and giving everyone the commandments, he specifically only gives Moses the commandments.
Right,
And then
right.
Moses has to go back and tell everybody else, as if God couldn't be bothered to just appear in front of everyone and say, hey, here are the commandments. I drowned the earth the last time this happened. Don't make me do it again.
Yeah, it's one person or a very small group of people claim God said X, Y, and Z. Other people believe that, and then eventually somebody writes it down. That's it. Your religion's no more impressive than any other religion.
Precisely. Or at least as far as we can tell.
Well, I mean, I used to believe it until I looked into it. But, anyways, go on with the non-case for Christ. Keep going.
Yeah.
If he was all-powerful, if he really was God, he could do that. And if God is love, the way most people...
Yeah, so this is the other thing, right?
That's an emotion?
No. The other thing is, like, if he was God, he could send his son down, right? And it's like, well, yeah, but he could also like accomplish the same goal without the bloodshed. Now, if you want to say God is all powerful, right? And he can accomplish any goal in any way he wants to, and he chooses to accomplish the goal in the way that involves him killing his own son, does that sound like a godlike thing to do? Does that sound like something a being with infinite would do, is to take the most convoluted route to a place instead of just being there?
Well,
I don't
God's nature is such that it couldn't not do it that way. So God isn't actually all powerful. It's powerful only to the extent that it's able to do the only things that it can do and did do.
And then that begs the question of what determines God's nature.
Well, look, now again, you're asking these questions. I keep telling you not to ask questions. We're never going to get done with this. It's not going to happen.
We're almost there.
Oh,
we're
you're
almost
gonna interrupt
there.
like 5 more times. I'm going to count how many times you interrupt.
Okay, please do.
It makes sense that he would do that. I think it's important for us to be a little more consistent about this and to stop being so embarrassed by supernatural claims.
It's not that we're embarrassed about supernatural claims. It's that we are embarrassed for you about supernatural claims because they seem blatantly inconsistent and don't make sense. And instead of explaining them in a way that makes sense, you're just like, nah, the Bible's right. That's one, by the way.
Especially when so many people believe in ghosts, or so many people believe in horoscopes or fate, or so many people believe that you can send good energy and good vibes like telepathically through the airwaves or something.
So because other people have wacky theories, that means your wacky theory. Nobody should be embarrassed to believe in your particular supernatural woo because other people have other supernatural woo. Even though that other supernatural woo, depending on who you talk to, might be different. There are some people that believe in horoscopes not to a spiritual degree, but just as a fun little thing that they kind of like to make up from a social perspective, but not something that they actually believe is a force in the universe. But you wouldn't know that because you just assumed it's spiritual. Anyway, this is my second time speaking up about it, but it's not that people who believe in other woo spiritual things are embarrassed about it. It's that yours has a burden of proof that it is not met. And it's not the matter of, oh, I believe in ghosts, but I'm too smart to believe in a God. It's, well, I have reason to sort of kind of believe in a ghost, but I have no reason to believe in a God, which you can't seem to tell the difference between someone who's embarrassed and someone who's skeptical. But let's keep going.
If that's all socially acceptable, then so too should be the very rational conclusion that Jesus was a great moral teacher who was also of divine origin.
Is that not a socially acceptable position? Because that might be arguably the most socially acceptable position, that you believe in Jesus. I'm just saying it's not going to be a big problem if you show up and you say, well, I believe in Jesus. In most cases, there are some cases where that would be a problem.
I think that Gandhi has Jesus beat on the moral teachings, though. But
I think I have Jesus beat on the moral teachings because I don't go around beating money changers.
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
temple.
well, he said don't think about what you eat or drink or whatever and all this, and it's like you can take that the wrong way, So
I'm just saying he whipped a bunch of people and nobody talks about it.
Look, again, those people, they had it coming, just like the pigs who got the demons put into them.
Yeah, if you want to kidnap Jesus and crucify him, that's all well and good. But if you just want to make a living in a temple, no, he has to bring the whip out. We can't have that. That's grounds for self-defense right there. All right. Is that the end?
Almost.
Thanks for watching that.
We made it to the end.
You did it with only 3 interruptions. Huzzah! We're done. Yay!
I want $5 for that. That was an official money for that.
I'll discount my book $5 because you still haven't gotten it.
Okay. I'll take the discount.
That means you have to get my book, and then I have to send you money. And that's how that works. All right, can you pull up the? Oh God, there's so many links. I don't even know which one it is here.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's so I don't know why.
Okay, the last one. Do you see? I tried to separate it with the dash.
That's the thing. The top parts are cut off. It only shows me the bottom parts. So the second to last is News 24 /
yeah, that one. Yeah, that one. Click that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Looks fine on my side. What you're talking about, skeleton?
I swear, if I could.
No, you don't. Yeah, look. Click it.
I will want to. I did. I'm trying
to.
You
didn't.
Thing.
You don't know how to do it. Click it. Done. Hurry. Yay. All right. So you have to make it bigger, I guess. So I love the advertisements right in the middle of the article. You have to zoom in. Zoom. Scroll in. Zoom in. Hold down Control and mouse wheel up. There we go.
I did. Did it do?
It did. It did.
Oh, okay.
A little bit more. Oh, okay. Oh, God. Okay, that's good. That's fine. No, just go up. That's fine. Okay. Oh, well, okay. All right. So, load this. I'm constantly amazed at the mysterious ways in which our Lord works. Take God's kill rate in the Bible. 2.5 million people. What can the devil boast? A measly 10 souls.
I mean, they're not wrong.
But it's just how would you wow, that's amazing. That's horrible. What? I mention this because we need to watch Satan, as he's notoriously sneaky. But he only killed 10 people. What the? Well, God is in your face and honest. One never knows what the devil has been up to. And better the devil you know. What I mean, but what is it? But anyways, of course, that the 2.5 million excludes the deaths resulting from the Great Flood, and Sodom and Gomorrah, and the general plagues, famines, and other miseries, and God kills raises to an impressive 24 million. Oh wow, amazing!
Now, while I do I have skepticism about these numbers, like where you get
It
these
sounds
numbers
about
from.
right. Yeah, yeah.
But even then, like I feel like these are insurmountable. Like at some
Yeah.
point, it doesn't matter how high.
Even those 10 who Beelzebub killed were not entirely his own work. They were the 7 sons and 3 daughters of Job, and God only allowed it as part of the bet. Technically speaking, these deaths should be shaved, 5 apiece as some of the blows earned reasons got in. Exactly. So, like, you've got nothing to blame Satan on. Like, what's he ever done? Like, nothing.
But even then, like
he turns the whole thing around. He's like, isn't that amazing? No, it's bad. Like, you've got, like, Satan's the good guy.
But if we're gonna talk about Job, then you have to understand the fact that Satan was like, Job ain't loyal, and he was like, nah, Job is loyal. You want to bet? Yeah, torture him for a while.
He knows though. Yeah, that's stupid. Anyways,
and I love how in that story they pretend, or at least they say, Satan just has this direct line to God whenever he wants, even though they're supposed to be enemies. He's just like, I'm gonna just speed dial God and make a bet real quick.
But what's extraordinary, the reason why I wanted to bring this to attention is the cognitive dissonance required to view this horrible mass killing and to say that's good, that's amazing. We got to watch out for that other guy that barely killed anybody. That's what faith does to your brain. And then most of God's strikes were perfectly logical and understandable. No, they're not. At all. If you're God, you can do things like just teleport people or whatever. Why would you need to kill anybody? Ever.
But again, you have to think about this, right? You're God. You can accomplish anything you want in any number of ways that do not involve harming anyone at all. And instead, you choose the most harmful way you can think of, which is to kill them.
Other times, he was probably intending to show off his sense of humor. Like when he killed Jerham by making his bowels fall out. The people he smoked for dancing naked around Aaron's golden calf. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Murder is hilarious. When I want to show off my sense of humor, I commit murder.
This is like, the aristocrats joke or something, like, and then we killed the baby boy, and then we smoked the people who picked up the sticks on Sabbath, and we call our act the aristocrats, just like,
and it says, isn't pleasing to know that our Lord has a sense of, I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Joel de Vieux? It's French.
But why would that be pleasing to know that he has a sense of humor that involves death? If it's not,
that's not a good sense of humor. That's not humor in my what? No, why?
Not.
How is that humor? Why is that?
What's funny about it? What exactly is the punchline?
Oh man, that's like, that Thanos. He's a real joker. Look at him killing those people. That's just so funny. Remember when he had those religious leaders killed for taking part in prayer contest?
But do you see? First of all, I really want.
This is a comedy routine. This has got to be. This can't be serious.
I want to know that verse now. The one where the religious leaders are killed for taking part in a prayer contest, because that seems.
Oh, that's the Baal versus God.
That's what.
It's Baal versus God.
Oh, Baal versus God. Oh, yes, I actually do. I recall that.
Yeah, First Kings 18. Yeah. So then there's been a couple of I think Dark Matter had a thing on like a
yes, that's what I remember it from. I remember it from his video. But the thing I find strange is this, right? So the phrase, the first sentence is it's my sociopath meter. It really is, because it's like, remember that one time God killed people? Oh, that's good times.
Read it like it's a comedy routine. What did they think it was? Master Priest? What about that time? When he made the walls fall of those Syrian soldiers. Oh boy, they never saw that coming. Like,
wait, I have a question now. Are we sure this website isn't satirical?
It's News 24. I don't know what this is. I just found it.
I have to verify it because this
I
might be
don't-
like
I
a onion
don't-
type website.
You know,
so
I mean, click
I
on.
make sure this is.
I mean, you can or click on show new tab of News 24 and see what it is. But yeah, I mean, no, but this wouldn't surprise me. That's the thing is the Poe. You can never, the Poe thing. You never know because this is people are this ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm trying to exercise my skepticism from every angle, and I would feel really silly if someone got me with this. If this was like atheist built, and they were like, "God," I would really feel a kind of way.
Yeah, but I mean,
But there are, and that's not to say there aren't people like this. There are people absolutely like this who take joy in the deaths of other people or God's killing of other people specifically.
I mean, it doesn't say who wrote this or whatever. Um, so but
No,
it's
see,
part of this news site. Like, why? Like, I guess this is an opinion thing. Like, but why wouldn't it say the author? That's really, I don't know. But
I know
it,
that's what makes me think
reads
that it might.
as,
That's what makes me think that it might be satirical, kind of
but
like
then
the way the Onion
but
is.
you haven't gotten to the well, no, because the rest of the website's like it's actually news, breaking news first. Like, I don't know, man.
I don't know. This is what an atheist would like use as a parody, which is
Yeah, but
why I'm
I'm
like
saying, like,
skeptical of it because it's so on point.
I don't know, but it's great. I don't care. I'm pretending that it's real. It doesn't. I don't care anymore. You torture me, I'll say it's real. But you get scroll down a little bit. Okay, so screw all the other stuff. I just love this last bit here. Okay, we live in a world where facts and fictions get blurred. In times of uncertainty, you need journalism you trust for only R75 a month.
What's R75? Is
I
that
have no idea. Oh, it hurts. Only R75 a month. What's R75?
I have
What
no
is it?
idea.
What's
But see, that's a prime example of how I look at stuff when people bring stuff up, and I'm like, wait, what is that though?
what is R75 a month? What is it? I don't know. All I'm getting is more research. Nobody answers that. Anyways, I don't know, but oh man, but this is this is even if that is a Poe thing, which would be beautiful. This is, but I've seen.
I would respect that level.
Honestly, I've seen and heard and read people do just about this, so it wouldn't surprise me. But because it doesn't say anything, I mean, it's hard to know. Who knows? But vote in the comments below. That's how we'll decide.
Yes, all 5 of you put in a vote. There's 5 of you, so it has to come out to a clear, decisive vote.
Well, I guess the only thing I found is that it's a pill with the imprint logo R75. So I'm guessing you pay them in pills.
I mean, I guess.
I don't know. It doesn't. What? You know what? Anyways, repeating 75. I mean.
Okay. I am just trying my best to copy everything you put in the private chat so that I can put it.
Well, I also emailed it to you.
Oh, you emailed it to me. Then I should check my email.
I think it's rubles. It's South American rand.
What the
R.
what R?
Yeah, it's South American rand. So yeah, that would make sense.
It does. I hope.
Okay, so that's about $5 USD. So yeah, that makes sense. So 75 ZAR is about $5. So yeah, that would make sense. So then if it's rubles, then this news thing is coming from, maybe some like ruble nation, South American. So they're South African rather. So that's,
Actually, I'm going to officially, because we are a little bit rambly. I'm still going to stay on, but I'm going to officially end the
oh
broadcast,
yeah. That's a good idea.
and then
That's a good idea.
we can keep going because
Yeah. We don't, pancakes. I got nothing. I'm done.
All right, bye. See everyone next week.
Whee!